So it's so lovely to see so many people in the room. Welcome to this symposium this afternoon. Hopefully you're in the right place. This is Public London Activating the City in our home, the London Centre, which is home to the NLA. If you're unfamiliar with the NLA, it's New London Architecture. It's a home of London's built environment community. We've been here for just over a year now, which is really exciting. So we're really excited to welcome you into our home. This space is filled with research, exhibitions, events, and so much more throughout the year. And today we're here for this symposium. So this symposium is for Public London Activating the City, which hopefully you've had a chance to take a little glance of over here. This is a key piece of research by the NLA, but also forming the backdrop to the 20 years of the London Festival of Architecture. So 20 years, so that was 2004, that was quite a while ago in a very different context. But over those 20 years, there's been a whole wealth of key projects and changes to the city, which we started to explore with this project. So over this afternoon, I'm going to hand over shortly to Manager, who's going to be chairing us through this afternoon. But just wanted to give you a big welcome to the London Centre and quickly thank our key champion for this project. So Greystar Quintain, Brookfield Properties, Atkin Realis, and our supporters, City of London, Momentum Transport Consultancy, and Gillespie's, have been key to making this project happen. So a massive thank you to all these groups of people for both this symposium and the wider Public London programme, which consists of a few different events happening over the next few months. If you're not sure about what's coming up, please do speak to a member of the team. You don't want to hear from me. You want to hear from all of our speakers who've been involved in the project. So I'm going to hand over to Manager Vigiesi, who is Director of Curatorial Practice at Sphere, Head of Public Engagement at the Architectural Association, and one of the Mayor's London Design Advocates. Over to you, Manager.
Thanks, Eliza, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many of you here joining us for this exciting symposium on Public London. So, as Eliza already mentioned, this celebrates the 20th anniversary of the London Festival of Architecture, and this publication, Public London Activating the City, looks back at some of the momentous projects of the last 2 decades that have really helped to transform London's public realm. The book considers how the festival has elevated public spaces through cultural placemaking, place activation, and meanwhile uses. I think in a lot of my own research and through so many of the projects that have been part of the festival over time, public space is really thought of as the stage on which the life of the city plays out. And I think more and more thinking of who gets to be part of that process and also how we can really ensure that our public spaces are equitably accessed, collectively owned and used, are important issues that we really need to address. So building on this publication, which will officially launch this evening, today we'll discuss what constitutes a successful and democratic public realm, and we'll explore the role of meanwhile projects in activating our streets and thinking about how to influence long-term thinking and the need for a shared agenda to ensure successful placemaking across the public realm. Just as a note, if you are unable to join for the launch this evening and would like to get a copy of the book, you can go to the front desk on your way out and pick up your copy there. So I guess without further ado, we'll move to starting the first session. I don't usually have a clipboard, so this is a new experience. So to open the first session, we'll be focusing on the role of meanwhile projects in activating streets. The activation of streets has really been embedded in the work of NLA since the first ever festival 20 years ago, which was then called the London Architecture Biennale. And as NLA co-founder Peter Murray described in his introduction in the Public London book, one of their interventions involved grassing over St. John Street and having a small herd of longhorn cattle herded across towards his Smithfield Market, which both highlighted the history of the area, but also showcased the ease with which, I guess, these streets could be transformed into public space. A recent study by Arup revealed that 80% of public space in London is actually made up of streets. So it seems a shame to have these occupied only by traffic. And the festival has long been a way to incubate and experiment with ideas for how to transform the city. And this initial intervention led to subsequent transformations during the 2006 festival to pedestrianize the area around Smithfield Market, which is an idea that's now been adopted as part of Hawkins Brown's strategy for the public realm around the new Museum of London. So with these ideas in mind, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Clarice Taven, who's the Group Manager, Major Projects and Programs of the City of London Corporation. So over to you, Clarice.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well? Yeah. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the introduction. So indeed, I'm going to talk to you about activating streets and the roles of Meanwhile project in the City of London. So the city is under constant pressure, and some of you may have heard about the new City Plan 2040, which announced a minimum delivery of 1.2 million additional square meters of office floor space. This is like, a major increase to be delivered by 2024, and this shows a continuous pressure that the streets of the City of London are going under, and the increased demand for different type of activities, deliveries, people walking, people enjoying. So how do we ensure we drive these changes? How do we ensure we deliver these changes of the public spaces and the space in between for the best of their users? How do we ensure good design is at the heart of every of these projects? So I'm going to run through some examples of projects we delivered in the city. I was trying to look back at our archive, if I may say, and trying to understand how long have we been delivering Meanwhile uses and temporary projects. I think it goes almost back to when the LFA started 20 years ago, maybe a bit less. But there's a series of projects we delivered. There are very different scales, very different forms, natures. Some were top-down, really started from strategic thinking. Others were really led by the community, wanted to see changes. So I'm going to run through some examples and tell you more about what we've done and what are the challenges we encountered. And sorry, I'm just going also to put my stopwatch to ensure I don't speak for too long. But you can remind me if I'm going over. So let's start with quite of a difficult and controversial project, Beach Street. Beach Street is a tunnel, covered tunnel, which is connecting the Barbican tube station with the Barbican Centre entrance. It's a space which is definitely dominated by traffic. There's quite high level of air pollution. It's increased over the last years, but it's really not a welcoming space. But how can we share a vision? How can we transform such a challenging space and take people with us on the journey? So in 2018, we worked with the Barbican and 59 Productions, and we delivered over 6 days a total different experience of what the space could be. So we removed traffic, and we delivered an immersive audio-visual feast where the audience was placed inside a piece of music, which was done on purpose by the BBC and the London Symphony Orchestra of contemporary classic music. So this was a way for us to really discover a new uses and how this massive, quite challenging space could become a place for people and could be really lifting up. So this is one example, and could we take this for a longer time? Could we take these kind of approaches to other spaces? That's the question, especially for this project that it's still up in the air. Another example, which was delivered also over 10 years ago, was the transformation of Festival Garden, which is a garden which was created in 1951 by St. Paul's Cathedral. You can see the cathedral just behind. It was a beautiful, quite manicured space, but as you can see, no one could access it. So with quite simple and little transformation, and in providing a temporary staircase, a temporary wooden staircase, we totally transformed the space. This intervention allowed us to really communicate with decision makers, with people dealing with historic building and heritage, which initially were really not convinced that we should touch, the fabric of this historic space. In doing this temporary installation, we managed to convince, this is very sensitive. We managed to convince the local community, the school nearby, that the space could really become inhabitated. And I have to say, the day when school parents came with swimming suits for their kids so they could play on the fountain at the back of the space, we knew we reached a stage that people really developed some ownership and they started to invest the space, and that therefore we could not go backward. And a very simple design was then delivered where we just tilted the grass to provide access, and then the space being inhabited and very lively since. So this is an example of how through a simple intervention you can take people with you on the journey, and you can really show what the potential of the space could become. Allgood Square is another big transformation that was delivered 8 years ago in the city. It used to be a junction, mainly dominated also by traffic, very difficult to navigate, very polluted as well, despite the primary school being just there. So a transformation was achieved over time, but this happened incrementally, and to get really a transformation, this needs to be done carefully, and more importantly, working with local businesses, local stakeholders was very essential to lead the transformation. And as just a few examples of what helped us to get there, we started with very simple interventions, and just closing the streets around, giving the space to kids was a way also to show how we can transform it. There was also a series of temporary interventions. As you can see here, the red seats, and there were some viewing platforms which help us to deliver the changes. But just closing a street is not sufficient, to make a space good for people. And I just wanted to show another example which was delivered in Smithfield area, which is showing how play and kids also, can invest spaces. And this was London, this was delivered for the Smithfield 150th anniversary, where a lot of workshop, play activities were delivered. And it also showed what the future of this space could become if we reclaim space from traffic and give it back to people and kids. I'm not going to necessarily talk at length, but like how lunchtime streets, so closing streets during lunchtime and to provide table and chairs and space for people to have lunch, as well as COVID-19 greening and seating measures, and all the parklets we've seen in London have really changed how people are using our streets. And this was really key in terms of supporting businesses during this very difficult time. Another project which has been really important and has been delivered over 13 years is called Sculpture in the City. The 13th edition will be delivered this summer. And Sculpture in the City is an annual sculpture park which is using the streets as a rotating gallery space. So to date, over the 30 iterations, the project have worked with 129 artists and delivered 152 artworks. So this really was delivered in close partnership with the local businesses to every year select some internationally renowned artists, as well as supporting emerging artists that can have a space in our streets and show their unique work. The project is also strongly connected to a series of initiatives and an activation program, specially developed with kids, and has a specific education series of workshops delivered with urban learners every year, which really take young kids and school to look at the the installations and understand what the work is about. Another example of a temporary transformation was in the Rotunda Garden. It's a garden which is not very visible, located in the south of Smithfield Market. So through this temporary installation, we really wanted to bring back some visibility of the garden, but also engage with the local communities. Smithfield, as it was mentioned earlier, will go through major transformation, and therefore, through this temporary greenhouse and a series of workshops looking at plant exchange, we managed to create strong connection and relationship with the local community and start to tell them about what the future of the space could become. Sorry, as part of this project, there was a lot of work as well being done with an accessibility team. So this helped us to really deliver some temporary installation, but also permanent changes in terms of providing full accessibility to the site, as well as embedding permanent electrical supply facilities and the technical support you need if you want to activate the space in the future. The Smithfield, the Moor Lane Community Garden was also very important, not only in terms of helping to green Moor Lane, but in developing a series of co-design approaches, so working with the local residents, getting them embedded and involved throughout the design process, but also up to the planting stage and then the future maintenance of the space. So more than the final garden delivered, the connections and the engagement developed with the local community was really key to the success of this space. And the permanent project that will be delivered there is using these modular concrete, planters as part of the permanent design. So people really wanted to keep it on a permanent basis. The project, from very early stage, also mentioned the need for creative content. As part of the project, we worked with an artist, a local artist, and a poet who worked and organized a series of workshops with the local residents. Everybody got to write their own poem. There were videos recorded and shared with the local community. And this ended up in the delivery of a poem which was included in the design of the garden on a permanent basis. So how can we also allow very site-specific responses and work with artists to remember a time when this happened? This workshop happened also very closely after COVID, so it was very important for the community to get together. Another project which was delivered last year is showing how circular economy can be also essential and embedded in all of our projects. This project is called From the Thames to Eternity and is being made of 68 stones which were reclaimed from the riverside wall from the 19th century. And these stones were located, they are still in place at the moment, across 7 sites from the Millennium Bridge up to Smithfield to create a space for people to sit and enjoy, but also to stimulate discussions about reuse of materials and circular economy in the built environment. The feedback and the impact of these projects has been very interesting, understanding the connection people will have with stones and with these natural materials, but also advocating and reusing of material in the built environment in general, and tackling waste, pollution, and really helping in time of climate change. I'm going to finish very quickly with one project which is very close to my heart. It was called Sit at the Table, and it was looking at how can we create equitable spaces. So through temporary installation of seats which were developed with workshop with schools and disabled artists and architects, we delivered a temporary project which then led to the development of some guidance that everybody can then use that are open for designer and architect. And all this work will inform also some permanent project we're delivering in the city. Sorry, I had to go very quickly. I just finished on the final project which is being launched tomorrow. It's going to be in the city Rotunda Garden, and it's called Playcycle. And the idea of this project is that not only we can activate spaces within, our perimeter, but that this structure can then move around and add no boundary, and can also, be used over time in lots of different parts of London. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Clarice. It was really incredible to hear about not just the complexities of working in such a historic area, but also the possibilities that the City of London's placemaking strategy opens up. So next, I'd like to welcome Saf Williams, the Curatorial Director from Brookfield Properties, who's going to talk to us more about arts in the public realm. Over to you, Saf.
Can you all hear me? Yeah, great. Okay, so my name is Saf Williams, and I am the Curatorial Director for Brookfield Properties. Brookfield Properties is a leading global developer and operator of high-quality real estate assets. So I'm leading the art strategy in London and Berlin across our events and art into installations. I guess what I love about my job is that it gives me the chance to see firsthand the transformative power that art can have in activating public space across cities. I'm here today to try and share some insights into our public art program in London and highlight some of my recent initiatives and discuss how our accessible public art programming engages tenants and local communities and helps change perceptions of the city, urban spaces, and what it means to come to work. Am I going the wrong way? Here we go. So Brookfield Properties brings its indoor and outdoor spaces to life through culture with the aim of connecting people and creating memorable experiences. These experiences encourage people working in our buildings and those who pass through them to see and interact with urban environment in new and rewarding ways. All of this is achieved by building long-term cultural partnerships and by working with emerging and contemporary artists who challenge conventional thinking and offer us fresh perspectives on life. We believe in the unique ability of art to transform these spaces from places that we rush through to places that we can linger, places that we can gather in and seek out and come together. I'm sure you'll all agree that public art and cultural projects are a key way to revitalise and animate public space. They play a critical role in making urban environments more engaging and inclusive. Across Brookfield Properties' portfolio, I can see firsthand the positive impact that our cultural enriched environments have on both our occupiers and the wider community. The use of art, culture, and wellness initiatives creates workspaces that hope to inspire, instill a sense of pride, and increase happiness levels. The success of our program speaks for itself. In the first 2 quarters of this year alone, we have curated and produced, it's actually more than this since I sent this in on Monday, 16 art exhibitions and installations, 16 events, 22 tenant experiences, and 16 wellness initiatives through public marketing and significantly through our tenant-activated program and app, which is called Access, which currently boasts over 4,729 active members. In 2023, we produced 18 exhibitions, 37 events and giveaways, and over 129 wellness classes and initiatives, all free. Our Art of the Workplace report, which we commissioned with the School of Life in 2022, underscores that integrating art and culture into everyday environments significantly enhances workers' creativity, engagement, and mental well-being. Additionally, the Arts Council of England in their 2020 report, Arts and Place Shaping, highlighted that investing in cultural activities can improve lives, regenerate neighbourhoods, support local economies, attract visitors, and bring people together. They and we hope to emphasise that the role of art and culture play in building community identity, prosperity, that they foster stronger communities and explore change. Brookfield Properties community in London encompasses over 16,000 tenants in the City of London and the Square Mile. However, I hope to extend this reach by the fact that we have a lot of neighbours and local workers passing through our outdoor spaces and visiting our receptions, which are always open to the public and free to enter. We also try and extend this reach through our curatorial collaborators network, which currently includes this year the Craft Council, the Association of Women in the Arts, London Festival of Architecture, Sculpture in the City, One City, the NLA, and this engagement also runs through the extension of our artist networks and partnerships such as the Eastern City Business Improvement District and the Culture Mile Bid. At Brookfield Properties, our public art program is designed to integrate art seamlessly and significantly into public spaces and receptions, creating vibrant environments or stage sets for activity, work and play. Our primary goal is hoping to foster a sense of awe and belonging through culturally rich and aesthetically appealing public spaces that physically bring people together. Art can elicit, of course, diverse opinions, sparking conversations and interactions, but public space is fundamentally about fostering this connection. And I also hope that we support creative talent by redefining what it means to sell and create art through our dynamic artist-owned and rent-based commission structure, which means that we support artists by paying them a fee. We pay for the construction of an artwork, but that the artist owns the work so that they can then resell it, re-show it, and it can have a life after the fact. We present new ideas and materials to new audiences, extending our spaces outward, and I hope to question definitions of what it means to show art in public and where. We achieve this by collaborating with artists, local communities and cultural organisations to create art that resonates with the local context and is a reflection of the community's changing identity. This collaborative approach ensures that the art that we present is not only beautiful, but it hopes to be meaningful and spark significant conversations, and it is relevant to the people who interact with it. So now I'm going to quickly run you through 3 case studies of what I've got going on right now. If I went back historically, like you, Clarice, there's many installations that we've done over the years. First of all, oh, I've gone too far. I wanted to talk about Principal Place and City Point. So this is Squiggle, which is currently on right now at City Point by Neon, and this is Radial by Fosters and Partners. Radial, which you're seeing now, uses reused and recycled construction materials to create a space for pause and reflection. It promotes sustainability and climate awareness, and Squiggle is constructed from flexible ducting, and it's playful representation of the non-linear nature of life, and it provides a bold injection into a much-needed space outside of City Point. Both of these pavilions will be completely recycled after we finish with them in September. And during the 3 months that they're on, we have lunchtime, DJ sets, acoustic sessions, and we basically provide them as spaces for our tenants to use as sets for anything that they want to do, any kind of events or interaction with them. We also kicked them off with one hell of a party for all of our tenants with about 400 people at each, which was great. Keeps going too far, or it's in the wrong order. Yes. Here I have 5 and 20, which is currently on at 99 Bishopsgate till the end of September and launches next Wednesday if anyone wants to come and join us for a drink. This is a group show which is about 5 years of the Brookfield Properties Craft Award and 20 years of Collect. We're showing over 35 artworks from the storage of the Craft Council collection, which is public but not seen by anybody because it's hidden into the depths of their storage. And we're showing a range of materials and significant works that the Craft Council have been buying at Collect over 20 years. It also features Halima Cassell, who is this year's recipient of the Brookfield Properties Craft Award, and she also has a solo exhibition at 30 Fenchurch showing over 100 artworks. Sorry, slightly different order. And then thirdly, I wanted to talk about Beyond the Matrix, which is an installation of 2 sculptural exhibitions curated by Awita, who's the Association of Women in the Arts. This is a partnership that I've started this year at 100 Bishopsgate. Currently, we're showing Jodie Kerry, the sculptor's work, and she's showing significant sculptural pieces of hers from 2016 and 2018, and we're showing them to new audience framed in the new context of 100 Bishopsgate. where later in the year, from September, we have Amelia Bowles, who is creating new site-specific bespoke work, which responds to the curatorial premise of a relationship between space, mass, and materiality. And then I just wanted to say at the end, looking forward, we hope to continue having this, using our public spaces inside and around our buildings to create inclusive environments for the community to use, and also allowing large-scale canvases for artists to really push their practice and work with our team to expand the way that they work and the way that they can resell their work and show it in spaces outside of museums. I encourage you all to embrace and advocate for public art as a vital tool for urban development and transform our cities into vibrant spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saf. That was a really great presentation on how public art can be used as a tool to engage local communities, but also to transform our perceptions of place. I'd now like to bring both of our speakers back on stage and also invite Cynthia Griffin, who's the Arts and Culture Manager for Strategy and Innovation at the London Borough of Barnet, as well as Sarah Castle, who's the Director of IFDU, who designed the 2017 Dulwich Pavilion, which you can see in a model in that corner at some point later this afternoon. So if you, all four of you could please join me up at the front, that would be great. So yeah, I'll kickstart a Q&A with a few questions for the panelists just joining us, and then some for the wider panel, and then we'll hopefully be able to open it up to the audience. So please start thinking about what questions you might like to ask. But maybe to get started with a question for you, Cynthia. How do you feel Meanwhile projects can influence long-term thinking? How can small projects and interventions impact on a macro level?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I've obviously been thinking about this, particularly in advance of today, but also in my journey here today. And I was going to start and be really honest and say that I didn't always think that Meanwhile interventions really made a difference, and I think that I've undone that thinking. And I think what's helped to undo that thinking is two sort of key drivers, I think. When I've been thinking about all of the Meanwhile projects that I've seen, either I've been closely involved with or have seen across London, I think there's a lot to be said for the context in which those Meanwhile projects take place, but also the bigger thinking around the plans for the public realm within where that Meanwhile project actually takes place. And then I was thinking of two very clear examples. So, for example, during my time at Tate Modern, when there was a big capital development to transform that museum, it nearly doubled in size in 2017. For many, many years, the back of the gallery was hoarded off, and generally speaking, visitors approached the building from the front along the well-trodden cultural route along the river. And of course, the thinking with reimagining that building was opening up new routes, encouraging footfall through into the neighbourhood, and what we see now, if we were to go to Tate Modern, is that the whole public realm on the southern side feels like a plaza, a place to dwell. And in advance of that, we developed a pocket park that really helped tie in to that bigger long-term thinking about major reroutes or cultural routes and how they shift in really sort of high-density areas of London. And I think the Meanwhile project in that kind of context is really, really important because it contributes towards that collective vision for a place. And more often, quite often there tends to be a lot of disparateness. But I think in that example, there was a coming together of the local authority, the developers, us as kind of key stakeholders in the area to think about that bigger vision for the area. And then I was thinking in a real contrast to the role that I currently do now is to manage culture projects in a borough that is, one of the second largest boroughs in London. It's a big district in North London, very, very suburban. Lots of town centres, but often quite small town centres. And a Meanwhile project in that context is so different. In actual fact, it feels like a very radical thing to do in that context, because there is what feels like nothing quite like that. So it does feel like you are genuinely transforming parts of the city that can feel very very localised and very different from a sort of inner city location. So I think it's, for me, it's about that the time frame, or where a Meanwhile project positions itself within the bigger thinking for an area, and then the context, how that really does inform what you can do and what you can kind of transform.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are some really great points that we can hopefully pick up on later in the discussion. I think balancing between a local community and then new audiences to bring into an area is, I think, really interesting in the work that you're doing now. But also, I think how you build in a kind of longer term legacy, I guess, into Meanwhile projects to make sure that they're meaningful. It's a great kind of strategic ambition to embed from the outset. So I guess for the second question, to move to you, Sarah, I guess it would be really interesting to hear you speak a bit more about the impact of projects like temporary projects like the Dulwich Pavilion, and the impact they had on your practice at that point in time, but also the role that they can play in kind of testing and innovating with like different ways of making buildings. And I think, again, picking up on some of those themes of like bringing new audiences in and intervening in, I think, quite a historic building. I think that pavilion was a way to mark like the 200th anniversary of the Dulwich Picture Gallery. So yeah, it'd be great to hear you speak more about that.
Yeah, wow, it was 2017, which feels like a long time ago now, that we won an LFA competition, and our practice was only 3 years old, so it was really kind of pivotal moment. And I don't know how many of you have been to the Dulwich Picture Gallery. It's an amazing building, and particularly if you studied architecture. This is the Sir John Soane building, which is like incredible. It's the first public art gallery, I think, in the UK, maybe even in the world. But it's a totally different typology of building in that it doesn't have any windows. So they built this. So when you're asking the question, who are you building for and why do people not really feel like art galleries are for you? If you don't put any windows, it's even more intimidating a structure. And also for a lot of people who haven't been to Dulwich before, it's a very, very beautiful place, but it doesn't feel very much like it's for everybody. At the same time, it's right next to Peckham, it's right next to Brixton, and it's got this incredible demographic around it. But the people who actually visit the gallery at that time were from a particular set of society. And so the idea of this competition was to actually engage, young and emerging architecture practices in the idea of like kind of creating something beautiful and having fun. It's cheap, it's fun, it's built quickly, it's going to get loads of press, that's brilliant. And as a young practice, you're like, woo, I've never been in the AJ before, this is exciting. But actually, the bigger question in terms of the brief is, what can a piece of Meanwhile architecture here actually do? So we built a piece of architecture that was about opening up the facade of the building. So it was a set of mirrors, and if you crouch down over there, you can have a little look in. But the mirrors started to blur the landscape, bring the trees into the building, so you couldn't really tell where you were. And all of the panels moved, and kids would run around it, and people started coming, and there was a bar there. And then Florence and the Machine played there, which was just like the best thing ever. And we were so excited. But actually, it totally changed the kind of visitor profile to the gallery. So over the course of that summer, the increase in non-white British visitors to the gallery was just totally different. 32% were under 34 against 4% normally. So it's just suddenly a whole younger set of people are going there. And also, 74% of the visitors who arrived at the gallery actually went to see the permanent collection as well. So it wasn't just about having, a drink or listening to some music or jazz or yoga or kids club. It was about going inside as well and seeing the artwork. So it became a mechanism, a hinge point by which it drew people from the communities around Dulwich into Dulwich and actually to see this art, it suddenly made the building accessible. And I think in the same way that the subsequent pavilion by Price Gore and Yinka did as well, in a totally different way. But I think it kind of demonstrates the importance of projects like that. And I think, you know, when we're talking about innovation, that, you know, I could talk to you for ages about how cheap the timber was and how we used really basic parts and how demountable it was. And that was great because you're testing things that you don't normally get to do as an architect. But actually, projects like this, I think it's more about kind of thinking about what it means to be creative in a shared world. Like, what are the buildings that we're creating and who are they for? Is this for me? A lot of the buildings that we have in our cities don't really feel like they're for everybody. And that power, traditionally, is in these kind of big bricks and mortar buildings. And actually, these kind of cheap, quick, meanwhile things often have loads more kind of community input into them. And they totally change the way that we experience the built environment, the way that we experience our cities. And so they're a really, really powerful tool in the way that we can create more inclusive spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's excellently put. And I was really fascinated to hear that statistic about how many people who came to visit the temporary pavilion actually engaged with the permanent collection, which actually really made me think of something you said, Saf, in your presentation with the project that you have with Collect, and how it's like using all of these objects that sit in the Crafts Council collection that we never get to access. And I think there's like a really interesting role that Meanwhile and temporary projects can play in actually making us engage with all of these permanent objects that we sometimes don't have any idea about. So I don't know if you wanted to come in and talk a bit more about the kind of relationship between the temporary and the permanent.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the things about our reception spaces is that they're obviously not gallery spaces in a contemporary sense. However, they have kind of mechanisms that make them good exhibition spaces. You know, they have invigilators, like in terms of I have security guards, receptions, they're sort of temperature controlled and people can access them all the time. But I think what's been interesting is when I first started doing it, I thought like we need to create work specifically for the space, and we still do that. But I think as I go along increasingly, I feel like, you know, with Jodie Carey's work with the Weta, like these are two like really phenomenal, big, large-scale sculptures that she did for the Foundling Museum that kind of went back into her studio and are not seen by anybody anymore. And then it's great to kind of, you know, reimagine them and posit them into a new space and a completely new audience for people to kind of engage with them, as well as give an opportunity for an artist to respond to that space. I think Craft Council has been a great collaboration. Like when we started working with them, they kind of kept coming to Brookfield Properties, and I think my predecessor wasn't really sure what to do with them, but we had a good sit down and it was quite a frank chat, and I said, like, what do you want and what do I want? And they wanted help with their acquisitions, like to add to their collection, and I wanted to show really beautiful work that people that were showing up to work and not, you know, going to the Tate or choosing to go to an exhibition could kind of buy into why I'd put it in their reception. So we thought like craft was really wonderful because people could ask how it was made first, and then like why it was made and what the intention was and who made it. And so it was kind of like peeling the onion and going back in layers in that way. And you know, we've done 5 years now. Halima's work is breathtakingly beautiful, I think, at 30 Fenchurch, but seeing the kind of broad range of works that we have right now at 99 has brought in completely different audiences that are not just inside the building. And it's nice to kind of reuse that space to have like launches, and ECBID have supported us with this one, which is great. And you know, we get a lot of pick up on social media as well as press, and just emails into me from tenants saying how much they love it. Like I know with Alice Kettle last year, we had a lot of security guards were writing to me, coming in with their mum, like because their mothers had been seamstresses and they didn't realise that what they thought were paintings were all embroidered. So, you know, it's like kind of an unexpected reveal, I think, in these otherwise can be cold spaces.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a real measure of its success that it's reaching such a wide audience as well. I think maybe then to pick up on something that Cynthia mentioned, and to ask you, Clarice, to maybe expand a bit on you'd mentioned briefly the challenges of kind of working in such a historic area like the City of London, and I was just curious as to how the Meanwhile can like really be in dialogue with that kind of historic fabric, and I think building on what Sarah said as well, like bringing in new age groups and demographics to like understand that history, but in a kind of playful way, and in an area of the city that maybe you don't, like kids don't often come without there being a kind of destination to bring them there. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about some of the strategic ambitions behind those projects.
Indeed, bringing different audiences, bringing families, bringing people in the evening at the weekend is one of the big challenges of the city. The city of London is known, as a working place and is very quiet during this time of the evening or the week. So working indeed with historic structures is something we do on a daily basis, because every time we touch something in the city, there's often close to a very contemporary tower, there's often an old church. And indeed, it's like any change. Change is difficult. People may first be really opponent to it. So the temporary approach, the temporary nature of meanwhile activities help us to take them, on a slowly discovery. It helps us to explain what the project is about. It helps also us to convince them. So in terms of decision maker, like for statutory approvals, or even, the community, as I said earlier, it's a very reassuring process, because if it doesn't work, it's not going to stay and we remove it. But what we noticed often is that in doing this small temporary intervention, we convince people. So I think it's really key in terms of getting the decision maker supporting the project. And indeed, the question of kids play, family in the city is also something we're not used to see. But as soon as you allow spaces to be accessible, as soon as you give the freedom for people to really invent them, it happens. If you've got a school nearby, until the festival garden was inaccessible, nothing was happening there, or Allgate. As soon as you create a space and you create this canvas, as we were talking with someone earlier, people then feel like they can embed it and bring their own identity, their own activities. So these temporary structures and measures allows us to be a bit more radical, a bit more innovative, and push the boundary and get people with us on the journey.
Yeah, which is really terrific, and I think the real value behind, meanwhile projects, which I think, like you, Cynthia, I wasn't always convinced by the terminology that we use and talk about things being there just for a short time. But I've definitely been convinced, and I've seen the power of how many of these interventions have really transformed parts of the city for the long term. I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions so that we can open it up to the audience. I have many more, so I can keep going, but it would be great to involve all of you. Okay, there's a question there.
Hello, can you hear me? Thanks so much for all the presentations, they were brilliant. My name's Moira, I'm Executive Director of Up Projects, and we curate and commission public art. So I was really enthused to see your presentation, Saf. And I guess my question is around, and I don't know if you'll be able to speak to this, but how public art and art became a priority within Brookfield, because often we find that it's hard to make that case for art, public art, creativity to be central, and it feels like you've really embraced that and you are a curator within Brookfield. So I don't know if you know the answer, if it predates your role, but it'd be great to hear about that.
Thanks for your question. So Brookfield's been investigating the arts since 1988, so it's like a long-term commitment. If you know anything about Brookfield, we've only been here since about 2016. So it's newer for us here. I think that there's always, in every place that we've been around the world, we've always had kind of art interventions. And I suppose that's probably in part due to the scale of the buildings and the spaces that we produce, and we could see instantly the value in it. For my part, I came in as a curator, as a sort of consultant for them for a couple of years, and then I eventually moved in-house. And I think once I took on this role, I transformed some of the spaces from showing screens with sports to like wanting to commission artists to make like huge playgrounds and these spaces that sometimes, particularly at City Point, for example, where it's really grey and a lot of towers surrounding, and there was just like this huge density of, you know, people there, and they needed like shade and somewhere to have their lunch and to meet for Run Club and to do all these things. And I didn't see that there was like a lot of opportunities for artists to kind of work in that way. Like you have Serpentine and you have Dulwich and some of these pavilions, but I thought that it was a really good opportunity to open up that creativity and explore like different mechanisms for how art could be commissioned. And I'm lucky that my senior team have responded really well to it, and I think our tenants expect them now. You know, like as soon as I take away a summer pavilion or an exhibition, we get emails in like, when is the next show coming in, what's coming next? And what's been really exciting in the 6 years that I've kind of led this strategy is that the tenants are now coming to me saying, I lead up, you know, Black Lawyers Group at Latham and Watkins. We work with Dada Gallery. We want to do an exhibition and work with you and curate. You know, we're now doing our 3rd exhibition with them this year in October. Accenture coming to us. So like more and more tenants are sort of seeing what we have and like are responding to us in such a positive way that it can't help but kind of continue itself. I'm lucky that a budget's always set aside. It's been the same for 6 years, to be honest, and we seem to need to do more and more, and I don't know how we do it with a team of 3, but we're doing like kind of huge amounts, and now with the app we know that people are responding and coming to these, coming to these exhibitions, so it's gathering data and a momentum that I hope will just continue. But yes, Brookfield thinks about it when they build a building. I'm working on One Leadenhall right now, the artwork that's going in there. I'm working on another building in Mayfair, and it's like set aside, how are we going to integrate the artwork into this space? So I hope I've helped them in that journey, but they have always considered it at the forefront of their mind in their developments.
There's a question in the front and then another one in the front.
Thanks. I'm Giles Semper. I'm CEO of the BID in Business Improvement District in Kensington. I'm looking to my right and looking at the Placemakers Toolkit and seeing number 2, the word co-create. Colleagues have mentioned communities quite a bit, and I wondered if they could just comment on how far they've been able to co-create some of their work with local communities.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if any of you, which one of you wants to go first? Clarice?
Yes, indeed. This is something that we developed over time. I have to say, it started often from like local residents or local community wanted to make change in a space and coming to us. We do also work very closely with Business Improvement District, which are also representing businesses, which are one of the main demography in the city. So what's been really essential is integrating the time and the tools of the co-creation as part of the project, which means during design competition or working with designer who knows how to engage and who are ready to indeed put in place this different approach. And I have to say the conclusion of this kind of work has been totally transformative, because you don't end up with a vision of a designer, but you really develop a proposal which is responding to the needs of the people in the area. But indeed, the recent work we're doing in the city is not only to work with the local communities, but to expand much wider. And how do we make the city an inclusive place? How do we make these people who do not relate to the city yet feel welcoming? And for me, the only way to achieve that is really in working with designer, artists, community engagement people. So like, for example, having an artist in residence, or working with this group I mentioned earlier of disabled artists and architects. So having their vision embedded into the design, having them as champions as well, because they will be able to talk to the real people we want to, engage with. I don't think this is something we could do ourselves. I don't think this is something a designer necessarily can do, and so on. I think they need to be an artist. They need to be someone with this vision and connection.
And it's probably worth mentioning that that project that you showed, Seats at the Table, was the result of a competition called Co-Designing Equity in the Public Realm. And it was really interesting, actually, the conversations that were had with all the different teams that were shortlisted on what that really would look like, and I think how we can collectively shape our built environment. So I think it's a really important point, the point about co-creation. Did any of you wanted to come in?
Could I just to come in on it, because I think also sometimes within architecture particularly there's a misconception that co-creation is something that happens at the end. Like, we've done the design, now why don't you all come in and help us build it, or do a bit of planting, and that's the creation, we did it together. And it's kind of it's a myth that needs to be the end of the process, and actually it's about integrating co-creation processes from really from the beginning. And we've worked on a lot of meanwhile projects, and some of them are long-term meanwhile projects, so kind of 10 years, establishing totally different uses on vacant sites, including workspace. And for instance, in one of our workspaces in Rotherhithe, on a vacant piece of land for Southwark Council, the reason it is a workspace is because of a co-briefing process, which is part of the creation process, of course, which basically said if we build something like a cafe or a set of shops or something like that, or a little mini market, it's actually going to compete with businesses that are already struggling in that area. So actually using co-creation to define the brief as well as the actual design outcome, of course the brief is part of that process, is just fundamental to it, and actually results in something much better at the end. And of course, great, this building at the end also has a really amazing garden that has been co-created by the community, murals all around it from a paint jam, lots of these amazing things, so people feel ownership. But they felt ownership from the beginning, not just from the moment after that we kind of, took the hoarding down. It's about getting people involved from the very beginning.
Yeah, I think from my perspective with community, obviously they're in public spaces, so anybody can access them. So with Squiggle, right now at City Point, we have so many mums and kids coming. It's all over Instagram, a mums groups. That wasn't something that I fully expected, because I think of it as a sculptural piece, but that has been a beautiful kind of an afterthought. But I suppose in a blatant way, our community at Brookfield is very much based around our tenants. We have sort of in excess of 16,000, and I think it's the EC Bid have done a research piece, and they've worked out that basically visitors that come into the city on average are spending about £326 a year or something in the city, whereas local workers that are here every day are spending, I think it's in excess of £3,000 a year. So this idea that the workers are just here and that's not community is sort of rubbish. I want to look after these people that are in the towers, and it's great to go to Jamaica Bar and have a drink with your friends, but that's not the only thing that's going on here. And it's really lovely to give away, free yoga classes, and we're trying to create basically a club without a house, without a community, and that's what it is. So if you're in a Brookfield space, you can go from any building and go to an exhibition launch, or listen to Halima speak about her work and the process of that, or have, a class led by School of Life in terms of talking about motherhood at work, or, etc. So that's the community that I'm specifically engaged with, although the after effect of collaborating with other people is that all these other people are coming in, from the Crafts Council or from Sculpture in the City, so that it's kind of, the community is widening in that sense. But I do want to build on the idea of the community of people that are working here every day, 5-6 days a week. And we know that when we put on classes and events, that the numbers in the buildings, there's a big uptick. So, people want that experience, not just to come in, do your work, leave and go home, that they kind of want something at lunch, before, after work, which is nice.
Yeah, it's a nice way to meet people that you would otherwise walk past.
And the same people that come to one event are checking me out, and they come to, we have die-hard kind of people that come to every single event, which is growing and really cute and lovely.
Before we move to the next question, I just want to check, Cynthia, if you wanted to talk about any of the strategies you're using to engage local people in Barnet.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with the competitions that we've done with the LFA last year and this year, it was very much, so this year I think very much written into the brief, but it was also the collaboration. So we worked with People Out of Restriction, the Poor Collective and GPAD, who had come together and put quite a lot of careful thought into how they would engage local young people. So the brief was to reimagine a sporting pavilion that had been in some playing fields for a very long time but was highly neglected. And Poor Collective's proposition was all about working with young people to think about messaging on that building, co-creating a mural, thinking about activating different uses for that. They built in like a make your mark, quite a participatory part within the building. So it was really the imagination of those two, those a collective and architectural practice coming together. With last year's built project, we appointed local creatives, and they were so well rooted in the area that they actually drew on all of the relationships and links that they had to really make sure that the project really spoke to everyone. They put on it's the cover image of the programme, but we pedestrianised a little area in Edgware, and they built a whole programme of events in and around Edgware as part of their brief. And because they were so well networked locally, they really were able to bring and attract a local audience. So I think it's a combination of the brief and how it's set. I mean, we've also had things like panels where, it's local representatives choose who the competition winners are. So there's different ways.
Yeah, so lots of different ways of working with local people. Next question in the front and then come to you. The microphone might be on. No. Do you want this one?
Okay, I'll just speak up. My name is George Sowell. I have the privilege of working with Atkins and commissioning James on Your Voice for a vast piece of artwork in East London. One of the things about commissioning that piece of work, which was a vast effort by a collective amount of people, is the role of the artists working with the organisation. And I'm curious about what your thoughts are about support for the artists as a group or collectively over time. One of the things that comes across in these presentations is about a larger organisation and the artist and what happens through it. And there's nothing really about the artist and the consistency of the work of the artist over time. And it's a very vulnerable situation being an artist because you sort of pick and mix procurement here and procurement there. So what's each of your views about the support for the artists themselves, not what can be done from the work?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll just summarize the question in case people couldn't hear it. But I think it's a really interesting question about what these kinds of projects can provide as platforms for the artists specifically involved, rather than the wider organization or the communities they serve. So I think maybe, Saf, you mentioned in your presentation about the kind of different models of ownership for the pieces that are produced. So maybe you could start by telling us about that.
Okay, so for me, my mum's an artist. I've got curators in my family. I never thought I'd end up working for a real estate company. I come from the Biennale. I come from artist-run initiatives and galleries. So that is my background, is thinking about the artist. And one of the things I noticed when I started, and wasn't just Brookfield, it's a lot of asset managers, etc., is that there was this idea when I first came to London 10 years ago that artists could be given a space and that they could just do a pop-up. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense because they're huge spaces, they need money to build the work, and where are they getting paid for their ideas? So the first thing I did was I created an artist agreement so that it outlines the commission exactly what my expectations are, what theirs are, when they're going to get paid. These are simple things that I think some developers don't do. Also, when I go approach, let's say 4 artists for a specific project, if it's not a competition, I pay them for their ideas. So we do £500 for a day's work just to gather their thoughts. That's not to pitch the final concept at all. That's to kind of set aside some time for me to just respond to the first email, to think about what kind of work they've already done that might align to the question I'm asking, if their schedule has a gap in it, you know, just that first thing. Because the idea that artists should just give up a day or 2 days of their work to respond to me also didn't seem appropriate. The second thing is I pay them properly, like when they do a proper project, and I know I am because I know what other people pay, and also the artists are happy to do it. And sometimes they come in at a lower cost than what I want, you know, that I offer them, that I say to them, like, for example, with Neon, we had our first negotiation for that project in October, and we just articulated it like 2 weeks ago. So it says in the contract, like, I expect to speak to you like half an hour once a week, so that they kind of have a guideline of how much time they're going to need. Now, with some artists, like Halima Kassel, she calls me at 8 o'clock at night if she wants to, and I will pick up that call. It depends. But other artists are busy and they don't want to give you lots and lots of time because they've got lots of projects going on. So I think, in answer to your question, you should be clear about the expectation, you should pay them properly, and you should provide them support. So the way that I do it is that I ask for a design, and then I, with them, hire a company to build it. And we discuss together, based on a budget, if we think that that's going to be the support, that they're going to trust that company to articulate their vision, and they are part of all of those meetings. They come to me with the studios so that their work doesn't feel like it's kind of like growing, that they don't have control over it, because that would be wrong, I think. And then, like I said, the second thing I've done is I try not to acquire work. Selfishly, I don't want to acquire work, because if I acquire work, then there's nothing to do and we would just stop. Some things are permanent, but I think what's better about these pop-up exhibitions is it gives a platform for artists to show their work, but then they own it. So if they can resell it, or another developer is interested in showing it, or part of it, Anna Lomax took part of the work and some of it was recycled. Sophie Smallhorn, I did an exhibition with her at 100 Bishopsgate, and then it showed at 7 other Brookfield buildings, and they said, cool, do we own this? Like, can we borrow it? And I said, she owns it, you'll have to pay her every time. And that was a negotiation between her and them. And then the last thing I do is we put all the contact details of the artists everywhere, all over the signage, so that if anybody wants to come in and buy a painting off the wall or contact them on Instagram or the gallery, that is between them, and like to use it as a showcase for that. So in that way, I hope that it's supportive, and I think it must be, because artists I've worked with years ago send me their catalogues all the time, they invite me to their studios, and we continue to be friends, and they share with what they're doing, so we must be doing something okay.
And maybe, I think that's really fascinating to learn about, and hopefully like best practice that more people can follow in your footsteps. But maybe to go to you, Sarah, as the artist or architect that was commissioned to do the Dulwich Pavilion back in 2017, if you could talk a bit more maybe about the impact that commission had on your practice. Or...
Yeah, I think, gosh, I didn't actually ever think of us as the artist. I was like, but I think it was a really important moment for us. I mean, I mentioned it before. When you're starting out, you know, in any creative practice, you don't actually get paid very much. It transpires, and having done a lot of education, you don't have very much money. And we were doing kind of little meanwhile projects, and we decided not to build up our practice in the kind of standard, try and find somebody who wants an extension, then build that extension, then hope somebody else wants an extension model. And so the kind of idea that we got this, you know, by leveraging smaller projects and little bits of kind of interventions within the city to get this commission was really important to us. But actually, what the LFA did was kind of put us on a platform within the media, which was really helpful and got our name in lots of different kind of places. And I think that kind of that coverage is really, really important. And I think the other thing that's kind of come out of competitions like this, and just kind of builds upon what you were saying, Saf, is that, like, I think more and more within the world of procurement, people are valuing people's time prior to the moment at which they're commissioned for that piece. So when you're asking small, young architects, creatives, artists to kind of, you know, contribute ideas to a competition, that you're actually paying for their time. And those honorariums are really important because you don't, you don't have a lot of money and you're putting a lot of time into these things, and often they barely cover it. But it still is about respecting the fact that people are bringing their ideas to the table. And I think, that it translates. And so, these commissions are so important, because if you take now, over in Brent, and we just finished one of the biggest pieces of artwork in the UK with La Quena. It's a permanent substation, which is multicoloured big wrap that wraps around and says, "Here we come, here we rise and shine." And if you've been on the North Circular, you may have seen it. And you go from this kind of little kind of mirrored pavilion outside Dulwich to here, where we're working with an amazing, fabulous artist. That's why, and that kind of, it scales you, and it gives you this aspiration, and it makes you realise how you can operate within the city. So it's an incredible opportunity. But I think the organisations who kind of bring these young emerging creatives and practices have a lot of responsibility to kind of care for them. And then, of course, you get this incredible opportunity, and hopefully it propels you to big things.
Great, thank you. And I don't know, Cynthia and Clarice, if you wanted to add anything, or if we should move to the next.
Just to add that indeed, all these practical examples and, taking care of the artists, like paying them properly, all of that, of course, is something absolutely necessary. I will say another way also to care for them is realizing, all the emotional investment they put when they develop these projects. So it's not only getting them working on a temporary piece of work, but also continuing the relationship. And I know, for some of the work we're doing, we also getting them, we continue the dialogue, and we also get them involved when developing a permanent structure. So we learn a lot from the temporary testing, experimental elements, but continuing the conversation and getting them, part of the final, design we do. I think is very important, and is a way to recognize the investment and the emotional investment they put in the project.
Great, thank you. Is the microphone working again? There's a question in the second row.
Thank you for your presentations. My name is Anna Savelova. I'm working as urban designer in Air Urbanism. It was great to see, especially that those meanwhile interventions have great potential for special events and activation. But my question is, could you elaborate on what effects those meanwhile projects had on evening and weekend use outside of those special events? Especially, as Clarice already touched on, there is a great issue of weekends and evening, not the space being unoccupied. Possibly, have you noticed any shift of use patterns, maybe outtakes, lessons learned, and maybe slightly a second question to the side of that. Can those meanwhile projects work on their own without those activation events? Thank you.
Thank you, that's a great question. So, question about activation, specifically at nighttime, and how those projects operate outside of the events that kind of launch them or inhabit them.
I think this is a very relevant question. And indeed, I didn't manage my time properly for the presentation, but I had a slide showing some installation. I would not say at night, but after dark. I mean, in London, there's half of the year we've got indeed dark environment. So how do we ensure the spaces are still safe, but also welcoming and animated? So it's, not for every project, but when possible, it's really part of the brief. How do we also, consider, the quieter time of the week and the weekend to ensure, it's not only an installation which is nice during daytime but disappear during the rest of the day. Definitely in terms of, the events, workshop, through the LFA festival, this is how we initially attract people into a space. A lot of also, I think the objective is to make people discovering, these spaces. They may not be aware of it. So I think the activation element is essential to create an initial relationship to a space and to create, this connection with the local communities. I think when the spaces are not activated, and how do you get people to come back? I think the design and what you created is essential. If you develop and design something which is not attractive, you won't have people coming back. But if you really got it right, if you took into account all the different complex and layers of what the space needs, people will come back. And I think flexibility in the design is essential. So ensuring that when you approach a space, you don't only consider it, as I said earlier, just during daytime or nighttime, but you consider the different uses, different demographies, the different people that will be using the space, and that the flexibility is integrated in the design.
Did any of you want to add to that in terms of projects you've worked on?
I think it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, because the work needs to be substantive enough and have enough kind of presence that people are going to want to come and see it. But at the same time, there needs to be an environment that supports people to come after hours. Toilets are important, somewhere to buy food, drinks, these kind of things. And I think this is something that the bids, particularly EC Bid, have been having a lot of conversations with us about. I know that, I've been working on weekends, sadly, in the city for like 10 years doing installations, and it used to be completely dead, and now the weekends just have a completely different demographic. So in the week you see commuters and people kind of maybe go to the gym and drinks afterwards, and on the weekend we know from our retailers that you have like a kind of reverse commute situation going on, so more families or people coming in on dates. I think one city which the NLA provides like this amazing online platform to show collectively what is going on in the city is critical. We also, on all of our signage everywhere, put maps which I connect all the artworks together so that you could accidentally go on like an art tour and see things, I think. And also I set up all the exhibitions so that they kind of speak for themselves. They don't need an invigilator, so they have a video showing the artist making the work. They have text explaining what the work is. They have the work. They have in the big pieces, we have, for people that are visually impaired, a description of the artworks when you come up to them that completely explains what you're looking at if you can't see it. So to kind of set them up and frame them so that you encourage people in, so they don't just stumble on them and think, what is this? Why is this here? That kind of working with retailers and saying like, are you going to be open on the weekend? And we know like when we put up our pavilions that they're busier because they tell us. So.
Yeah, and I think that raises a really important point about the things that we often don't think about enough when it comes to accessing the public realm, like toilets and things being accessible at different times of day, etc. So I think it's like a really important consideration to make the public realm truly accessible to everyone. There's one more question at the front, and I'm just conscious of time, so maybe we can have you ask that.
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Monica Stephen from Brunel University. And my question, I really enjoyed the talks and the discussion, but I think the community or demographic we always forget is young people, and I'm thinking of my students, of children or students from age 14 to 24, where they're still not earning money, etc. What strategies? And I'm thinking of what Sarah said, but also Clarice. What strategies are in place to actually think about the future, uses of the city and how to bring in young people without huge disposable incomes. And I think there are a lot of opportunities with the Elizabeth line, where you see a complete different demographic coming in, etc. But also during austerity, it's much more difficult for young people to spend money. On the other hand, my 14-year-old feels safer in the city than in the suburbs. So what strategies are there, or what would your dream strategy be?
I think that's a great question, especially I think coming out of the pandemic where so many young people felt increasingly isolated. It's really important that they feel empowered in the city. So I don't know which if he wants to respond.
I think, yes, there's been a lot of focus on the youth and families in the discussions, but I have to say, when we consider communities, the idea is to consider really, like transgenerational people. I mean, all generations, elderly people also is a group of people we don't talk very much. So I would say, the conversation's been leading that way, but when we talk about the community, it's a much wider definition. And to respond to your specific point about how do we encourage this, 14 years old teenager time, there's been quite a lot of work indeed on safety around women, but girls more specifically, the type of activities to provide them. So I think in providing a safe environment, you already, create the first level for people to come in. The second level will be through the fact that all these interventions are free. So indeed, it's not about necessarily, requiring, to spend the money to be able to access them. And indeed, as we said earlier, providing the surrounding support, public toilet, easy transport access, that's at the end of the day, it's all an ecosystem that you create to support the venue.
Yeah, Cynthia, maybe you want to come in, because I think the GLA's child-friendly city guidance had like an amazing reference, I think, from Barnet of this project by Europa that changed the yellow street marking lines on the road into kind of more playful lines that you could like run and play along, that kind of really unlocked children's imagination. So I think Barnet's been doing a lot of really nice work in that area.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about that specific project to say more, but what has cropped up into my mind, which kind of links with the previous question, was when I was Arts Development Manager in Brighton, and this was post sort of pandemic, when that city, it's okay to take us to another city, by the way, when that city was sort of opening up again, we programmed a series of third Thursday evening sort of events that would activate the city, but also lesser known parts of the city where there might be much smaller businesses or lower footfall. And we had sort of roving projections that worked really well. But there was another initiative which was all about working specifically with young performers that, probably during the pandemic wouldn't have had that exposure to live music performance, were kind of given spots to perform their new material. It was collaborating specifically with, I think it was university or it was like a sort of creative faculty and it was very specific to the needs of that city and the young and the missed opportunities in relation to the pandemic. But it was an incredible platform for young musicians to be performing live on the streets of Brighton for that, as part of that. And it was also just adding a new kind of activation to a very, what can appear to be a very busy city anyway, but post-pandemic that was a very different kind of context. So, that's a small example of something quite tailored to a very specific needs.
Yeah, but I think it's so important to give these spaces as platforms for young people, for elderly people, or for different groups of people to kind of appropriate and use in ways maybe none of us have ever imagined. I'm conscious of time, so maybe as a way to close the panel, I wanted to know if each of you had like one piece of advice that you might give people in the room who are keen to activate their projects or neighborhoods through a kind of Meanwhile platform.
I would say just do it. Without sounding kind of crass about it, I think strategy is incredibly important. However, I think a lot of what we've done and like the successes is just kind of trying things and doing a range of different activities and seeing kind of what sticks and what works. And I think sometimes it can get bogged down a little bit in like fully fleshing something out over like 2 years and conceptualizing it, and sometimes you need that, but sometimes it's good to just, I don't know, I used to work for the City of Sydney and they taught me that, like they just did a huge volume of work and it just kind of connected to the whole city because they just knew that they were kind of the instigators of making like incredible things. And I feel like we all just need to kind of be a little bit brave the City of London used to say no to a lot more than they do now to me, because I think we came on a journey together where they thought, I don't think you can do that. I was like, can we try? And then we do it. They're like, oh, this is great. And then now they ask for a lot more, which is good.
Perfectly sets you up, Clarice, to respond.
I was going to say trust the process. So indeed, like, you know, give space and time and the, you know, the fund and the funding to really allow this development, allow that, you know, you may get it right, you may get it wrong, that it may take you also to a different space that you wanted it to be. So be open that, you know, see, this is an interactive process, taking into account, you know, the different needs and different people. So just go into it with an open mind and the, you know, the trust that it will give you, it will take you to the right place and the right direction. And if it's not the right one, the next one will be the right one.
To keep trying and testing. Cynthia?
Yeah, if it doesn't sound too corny, I would say that, you know, meanwhile interventions win hearts and minds. So if that's what you're trying to do, then that's what, you know, often that's the case, isn't it? And they de-risk. They just take a lot of the kind of risk out of it. So they're a great enabler to sort of win allies and to build champions.
And finally, Sarah?
I just think that they're like a super opportunity to make people a bit happier, and I think there's not enough of that around. And like, if a few of the things that we can do in the built environment actually make people smile, it's like a no-brainer. There's just one example I've got. I'm from Manchester and live in Manchester, and a community came together, did a really small thing with a poet called Lemsisay, and they each of the members of this really diverse community each picked a bird, and they painted that bird on the side of a building. There's a woodpecker, there's a robin, there's another thing, and it has one of Lemsisay's poems on the side of the building, and it's really short. It's said the sun to the moon, said the sun to the moon, said the moon to the stars, we have more in common than sets us apart. And every person in that area loves it and is so proud, and it's the simplest thing. So it's these simple things that just make people smile and come together, then what's not to love about, meanwhile.
Well, I can't think of a more perfect way to end the session. We're going to have a short, 30-minute break. There's refreshments over there that you can help yourself to, and we'll come back for the next panel at 4. But before we close, I just want to thank our incredible panel for all of their amazing presentations and contributions. And also to thank all of you, because that was probably the most engaged Q&A I've ever had the pleasure to chair. So thank you, and please keep them coming for the next session too. So to get us started to discuss this, I'd like to welcome our first speaker of this session, Neil Shah, who's the Global Design Director of Greystar. So over to you, Neil.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. It's great that we're all here today to mark the 20th anniversary of the London Festival of Architecture. My name is Neil Shah, and I'm Global Design Director at Greystar. We develop, manage and operate residential rental properties here in London as well as globally. In this presentation, I'm going to briefly introduce who we are, what we do, and focus in on 2 public activation projects we are delivering in London. The unique stewardship approach we take on such projects and what it means to the quality of our projects, the people it touches, and consequently, the effect it has on the business model and the viability of the product. For over 3 decades, Greystar has been endeavoring to set the standard for excellence in rental housing. We are an established and mature business in the US and have grown internationally over the last 10 years or so. Today, we manage and operate over 893,000 homes, student beds, and housing in general in leading markets worldwide. That's over 2 million residents. We are, in fact, a relative newcomer to the UK housing market, establishing ourselves as a 2-man band back in 2013 in Starbucks, but our 10-year journey has been defined by dynamic growth with a commitment to good design, innovation, sustainability, and community engagement. Internationally, Greystar is also a relatively new, but it's growing dynamically. We currently operate in 17 countries, including the UK, Australia, Brazil, Chile, and various countries across Europe and Asia. Each new market poses unique challenges, especially in navigating housing policies that quite rightly protect the standards for sale housing or affordable housing, but it doesn't really address sometimes the specific nuances of professionally managed, institutionally owned, purpose-designed rental properties. Despite these challenges, our mission is to build not just buildings, but communities that enrich lives. As a vertically integrated business, and there's a sort of diagram here, which is a little bit sort of technical, but our approach is comprehensive. We raise capital, we deploy it, we develop and construct residential buildings, and then we continue to operate these properties throughout its lifetime. Once stabilized, these assets are typically recapitalized with other investors, and then we often continue to manage them going forward. It's quite cyclical, and it's kind of end-to-end, so we're in it for the long run. This model of long-term stewardship sets us apart from perhaps traditional developers. Our decisions are kind of driven by long-term sustainable value rather than immediate outcomes. So take, for example, our projects in Greenford, over in West London, and Bermondsey in Southeast London. These are two of our most ambitious developments ever taken by Greystar internationally. These master plans aim to transform previously inaccessible industrial areas into thriving residential hubs with over 3,700 homes combined. But they offer more than just homes. They're mixed-use communities that provide new local amenities such as retail spaces, workspaces, and public parks, serving both our residents and the surrounding neighborhoods. At Greystar, we believe the spaces between our buildings are just as crucial as the buildings themselves. Our designs prioritize livability, obviously from inside out, but also outside in, ensuring that every project positively contributes to its environment. This philosophy guides our every decision, from architecture to amenities, creating spaces where communities can potentially flourish. Greenford Quay is one of the largest purpose-built rental housing developments in the UK. This new 8.5-hectare neighbourhood revitalises a previously derelict industrial site along the Grand Union Canal, which has been inaccessible and cut off by the local community for decades, severing that entire neighbourhood. Set to offer 2,118 homes upon completion, Greenford Quay is also a vibrant community with 13,000 square metres of commercial space, including offices, retail, and leisure facilities, all set within 3 hectares of new public space. To date, we have delivered close to 1,000 rental homes across 3 multifamily buildings, all centred around the main square. We also retained a Grade 2 listed building built in 1935 by Wallace Gilbert and Partners. Ultimately, we aim to upgrade and sensitively refurbish this building and provide workspace within the master plan. In the meantime, we're partnering up with businesses to activate this building with flexible co-work meanwhile use. These initiatives will not only activate the building itself, but also the immediate context, and reinstate historic access points that once served as the main entry points to this site. With almost 75% of the development allocated to build to rent, our construction commencement date was not just dependent on achieving pre-sale targets as it would be in the for sale market. So we were able to accelerate that development process, mobilize quicker. This meant that the local community was able to quickly realize the benefits of newfound connectivity, additional attainable housing, and significant public amenity. Central to our vision for Greenford Quay is unlocking the decades-long derelict site and the creation of a new space that's accessible and engaging. These include beautifully landscaped gardens, children's play areas, a waterfront public square, and an amphitheatre linked by a new canal footbridge. Permeability has been greatly enhanced across the site, with a new network of routes and spaces enabling an enriched pedestrian and cycling experience, creating links to adjacent open space, local shops, and transport nodes. Our commitment extends to year-round cultural and community events that our community management and events team bring to life. From outdoor concerts and farmers markets to art installations and educational workshops, Greenford Quay is a hub of activity that serves both residents and the local community. This approach not only enhances the livability of the area, but it also strengthens those resident and community bonds within the development. This in turn creates meaningful connections between our management teams, our residents, and then members of the local community, which in turn encourages people to continue living in our buildings and realize the viability of our business model. We have also implemented volumetric modular construction at Greenford and have delivered over 1,000 apartments using this approach. This method involves constructing large segments of our buildings in a factory setting, which are then transported to site and assembled. This process significantly reduces the environmental impact of construction by minimizing waste and reducing the energy used during the building. A study by Heriot-Watt University noted that it can reduce waste materials by up to 90% compared to traditional building methods. It also speeds up construction by up to 50% compared to traditional construction. This accelerated speed of construction also means reduced nuisance to residents and neighbours, particularly on phased master plans like Greenford. Overall, there's less noise, less traffic from construction vehicles, and overall, a much cleaner and quieter construction site. And there's some interesting facts on the screen there. The Bermondsey Biscuit Factory, another significant development that we have just started on site, transforms the historic Peak Freens Biscuit Factory site into a new cultural and residential landmark. The factory was in operation from 1866 to 1989, after which the site was used for light industrial uses, but it's essentially remained vacant and inaccessible to the local community for over 10 years now. The project includes 1,624 homes, with 35% designated as affordable housing. Beyond the residential units, the development features 15,000 square meters of flexible workspace and 10,000 square meters of retail and cultural facilities. Part of the historic factory building is being retained, and its cavernous ground floor is being earmarked as a cultural or leisure anchor destination for communities near and far. Public spaces at the Biscuit Factory are designed to inspire and serve both the residents and the wider community. These spaces include public plazas and a new public square at the heart of the site, providing a green link connecting the old and new parts of Bermondsey. Part of our planning amendment included enhancing the floor plates of each building in the master plan that we inherited, to ensure that the apartments are all planned with the right amount of storage, good kitchens with breakfast bars, good proportions to all the bedrooms and living rooms, and making sure that simple things like a TV in front of your sofa are possible. We also replanned the buildings to connect all cores and enable the addition of a second means of escape to buildings, plus complying with updated building regs on sustainability and overheating. We also ensured that the right amount of internal and external amenity was added into each building, and in the right place that commanded the best views and have the right adjacencies. These are things that we hold dear to our heart. We made all of these enhancements, and we were still able to provide the same mix and add 80 plus more homes without significantly changing the height and massing. In fact, we were able to remove 2 towers, where you can see those red circles. We were able to remove 2 towers across the whole scheme, with 1 tower removed from the central part of the scheme, to open up the space and give it back to the public realm and local community. Like at Greenford, the Biscuit Factory will be enriched with site-wide programs that cater to a diverse audience. These programs will include art exhibitions, community workshops, and seasonal events that make public spaces dynamic and engaging. Both Greenford Quay and the Bermondsey Biscuit Factory reflect our dedication to community-driven development by focusing on creating not only residential spaces, but vibrant public areas enriched with diverse programming. We ensure that all of our developments are integrated into their local environments and contribute positively to the life and culture of the surrounding areas. Just finishing up. Given the rental tenure of our buildings, Greystar maintains a strategic focus on achieving 97% occupancy. You know, we want our buildings full. We're not like sort of for sale developers where, you know, residential units are offered up for investment purposes. So that 97% occupancy rate ensures that our properties are consistently offer top quality living conditions and remain as appealing as they were on day one. This requires meticulous maintenance, timely capital improvements, and robust management staffing and services. Beyond the physical upkeep, we enhance tenant retention and satisfaction by fostering vibrant community atmospheres throughout the organisation of community events and the activation of public spaces. Such comprehensive stewardship and community engagement are crucial for sustaining a high occupancy rate and making our properties attractive long-term investments for our partners. Our work is much more than property development. It's about fostering long-term relationships and building environments that enhance lives. Thank you for allowing me to share our vision and projects with you today. We're excited about the future and look forward to continuing our journey in shaping cities for the better. And I didn't even use the word placemaking once. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. I think that was really fascinating to hear about the kind of wider ecology that needs to be considered when delivering these large-scale projects at Greystar. So it's a great way to get this session started. I'd now like to invite David J. Fiorin, Associate Director of Landscape Architecture at Atkins Realis, to come up to the stage.
Thank you. So, afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm actually just going to do a very quick whistle-stop tour of Atkins Realis' work on the Phase 2 podium at the Barbican. I've been looking forward to presenting this to you today, but I do have a small confession. Well, I have told some people this already, but I'm not actually the project lead for this. Unfortunately, he's actually away on leave, so I'm afraid you've got me today. But I'll do my best to do it justice. So very quickly, this is, as I mentioned, a whistle-stop tour looking at the Barbican Podium Phase 2 project, and we'll be looking at how a shared vision on the scheme and intense collaboration has unlocked what we think is some real long-term benefits for what is a truly unique place. I'll cover the sort of problem that triggered the initial brief for us, the opportunity that we thought we had, how we developed a shared vision and what that was, and then we talk about the collaboration together and where the project is today. So this here is a quote from the original architects from Chamberlain, Powell and Bonn, who said that the original vision for the Barbican aimed to create a monument to hope in architecture and was centred around the belief that the things that we can, the things we build can help us live better, more equal and vibrant lives. Now that vision at that stage obviously holds true for what we know of the Barbican now, but you know, we believe that it's also incredibly true as it stands today. And the essence of that vision, I think, rings true in the work that we've done, and we've taken that forward and built on that and adapted it for the 21st century. So a little quick recap really. So on the 29th of December 1940, the area was bombed, leaving a 32-acre site in the heart of the city in ruins. Now, the City of London, after the war, started to think carefully about what this space could be and how they could bring that into the 20th century. And the idea for the Barbican was developed and born around the idea of a sort of urban microcosm based on the idea of residential blocks arranged around communal spaces. So yeah, here we've just got a map there that illustrates various phases of the scheme. So the grey hatched area here is actually phase 1 of the podium renewal, which is complete, and you may be familiar with that, and you can see that today. Our work focused on the phase 2 podium, which is this number 1 there in that area, and the other hatched areas actually form other priority zones within what's deemed as phase 2. So our project on the scheme was the City of London, and we were also supported by Andrew Lord Consultants, Future City, Aquaneo and Flow Free. Key stakeholders being the City of London, obviously, the Barbican Centre, Historic England, the 20th Century Society, and obviously local tenants and businesses, all of which had a part to play in the establishment and development of the vision. The image there you'll be probably familiar with. This is the Lake Terrace, and as you know, the Barbican itself is a truly remarkable place with a unique cultural and social identity. So in terms of the problem, what triggered the commission was the fact that the drainage system on the podium was sort of reaching the end of its usable life. This images here illustrate some of the issues. And unfortunately, there was water ingress through the podium, which was causing damage in the occupied spaces below. So the original brief was effectively to lift and replace elements of the podium, repair the waterproofing, and originally it was to put it back like for like. However, we were thinking more about what we could do with that, and this image here just shows you what that space looks like currently. So if you can imagine, the idea just is to lift those elements, and if we could, just sort of replace that and solve the problem. But through collaboration with stakeholders and the City of London, looking at relevant policy, it was quite early apparent that there was actually a lot more opportunity here that could be unlocked, particularly through the ambitious policies and strategies such as the City of London's Climate Action Strategy, and that being a key document that allowed us and them to explore what more this project could actually do over the long term. So as they discussed and identify what could happen, we knew that we could potentially look at increased greening, which would bring sort of ambient environmental benefits, the integration of SUDs, biodiversity enhancements, to name a few, were all unlocked through these policies. And it was through talking through that and how we could knit that together that the idea and the vision of what we called the life on the woodland edge was born. And this image sort of tries to capture that. And this is this idea of this shared vision of greening the space and unlocking opportunities for recreation, improved air quality, biodiversity enhancements, and I can talk about a few more of the benefits that have been born from that. And that looked to respond to particular challenges that were identified through the collaboration and engagement with various stakeholders. This section I've just added in just to sort of illustrate the sort of scale of the space relative to the built form. So the podium itself is quite an expansive area. And I think through the urban greening particularly, I think over 70% of new greening has been achieved in the scheme, starts to create this whole new idea of this woodland edge concept. Here I've just taken this cross-section illustrates some of the elements that you would see on the surface, but also the work that's happening below the ground that you don't see, to capture that water, use that water efficiently. We've integrated elements of SUDs, as I've mentioned. There's been improved lighting, thinking about safety and connectivity. We looked at how we can improve environmental aspects by using sensors to on-site to detect the current temperatures. We've got wind speeds, which we were modelled, and we've used that to inform the design and make some adjustments to the scheme. Now, I don't have long to go into that, so I'm sort of whistling through it, but there is a website, and there is a link on here that I've shared that you can have a look, and it will give you a lot more information about that. This is moving back a scale, if you like, to look at the phase 2 area master plan in its entirety. So we looked to create this more cohesive master plan, which used, as I mentioned, innovative microclimate analysis to help drive the design process. And that was partly what allowed us to justify to achieve a significant increase in the percentage of greening within the space. So with this shared vision established and talking about what we could try and achieve through this life on the woodland edge, there was a number of benefits that we wanted to try and achieve. This is a summary of just some of those, and the link that I mentioned is actually there, so, which you can add. And that website was actually part of the collaboration and stakeholder mechanisms that we used, which was used in combination with things like walking tours, workshops. There was various points of interest and vinyls applied to different parts of the building to give information about the scheme. And these were the sort of mechanisms that allow people to engage with that, comment on the vision and the design. Here's an image of actually the project lead, who's actually on holiday at the moment. That's him pre-tan, explaining some of the ideas behind the scheme on one of the many walking tours that we had. What I wanted to just really show is how today there's some of the sensors that I was mentioning are actually in situ here. So one of the ideas that we're looking to do is monitor the baseline and then apply that once the scheme's been implemented to see and hopefully prove these interventions that we've predicted have actually been achieved. So the scheme benefits will provide social, environmental and cultural benefits, hopefully for decades to come, which we hope ensures the original vision for the Barbican estate prevails, whilst adapting that space for the new opportunities and challenges that we face today, such as the climate and biodiversity emergencies. So we're looking to create a space for people and nature, and this, as I said, has been developed through establishing a shared vision. And then, as I said, it's very quick. Thank you very much. And just to conclude, through a shared vision and effective collaboration, project's gone above and beyond what the initial brief requirements were, and the scheme now secures, or will secure, this special place for the future enjoyment of Londoners and those that visit here in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. It was really fascinating to hear about, I guess, the ambition and collaborative approach towards intervening with such an iconic project in London. But I also loved that the starting point or the catalyst for all of this was drainage. So hopefully we can talk about that more in the discussion to follow. I'd like to invite both you and Neil back onto the stage or to the front of the room, and also to invite Camilla Sigurd-Andersen, practice lead at Hassel, and Ruchi Chakravarti, who's an urban designer, placemaker, and master planner, to join us. Well, I think, I mean, both the presentations were really great to kind of talk about the ambitions behind developing a long-term vision, and also how you really get all the different stakeholders involved to buy into that kind of shared vision. And I think maybe to get us started for the discussion with a question to you, Camilla, could you tell us a bit more about the research that you've been developing on evaluating the various kind of social, cultural, economic, and environmental impacts on like investments into placemaking?
Yes, of course, and thank you so much for inviting us to contribute today. My name is Camilla Sigurd-Andersen. I'm the practice leader for landscape and urbanism at Hassel, which is a global architecture and design practice. My background in architecture and design has always been around trying to understand how people use the spaces in between the buildings and how we create public spaces that encourage and invite people to enjoy the public realm. And that's something I've been studying in Scandinavia, the US, UK, and now Ireland. So about a year and a half ago, we got involved with a developer in Ireland that's building a large commercial scheme, 600,000 square feet, and a 1 acre park. And like us, they were interested in understanding how those investments in placemaking, and particularly investments that sort of go above and beyond what a developer might be expected to contribute to the public realm, how they are creating a return, both in social, cultural, environmental, and economic terms. So the way we've gone about this study, it's a 5-year study, we're in year 2 now, is that we, first of all, would sort of define placemaking investments as the contributions that the developer is making both to the physical shape of the public realm, the paving stones that they choose, the trees that they plant, the way pathways are shaped, and so on. The contributions they make to events and programming, so sort of the software of the space, the way that they are activating it through events and inviting people in, or having art exhibitions in the space and using that as a way to draw people in. And then through their governance and management initiatives. And fundamentally, ultimately, what we've seen across projects anywhere is that if you really want a place to be successful, you have to tackle it both in terms of the hardware, the physical spaces, the software, how you program it, and then the governance management of a space. And if you're missing any one of those components, that place will almost definitely struggle to thrive, and certainly in the long term will come upon significant challenges to thrive. So looking at what the developer is doing across those 3 dimensions, and then repairing that up against what we're seeing and what we're finding in terms of the social, cultural, economic, and environmental impact of those investments. And those measures are being, that data is being collected across 20 different reporting areas, which combine both qualitative and quantitative metrics. And as I said, we are in the 2nd year of study now, so we've done 1 year. That report is out already. This year's been really interesting because there's a lot of development that's actually been taking place on site. So to see what that does to the local community and the local place has been fascinating. And then next year, the whole site is sort of going to open and come live, and the operators are going to come in on the ground floors. And then the years after that, we're going to hopefully begin to see and really understand how different interventions is having an impact to help this developer become smarter in the way that they are choosing to activate their spaces and buildings and so on, but also hopefully to make the case for everyone to take placemaking seriously, because ultimately, and the early indicators of this particular study, but indicators from studies that exist from all over the world, is that if you make an effort and you actually care about creating places where people are comfortable and where they can thrive, then you will benefit tenfold, because you will get a place that is vibrant, that is loved, and ultimately that is what drives value in the built environment.
Yeah, I think that's very well put, and I actually really liked how you talked about it as like hardware and software, or that actually make a good place. And so maybe to build on that, to bring you in, Richie, to talk about, I guess, drawing on your experience, what are the ingredients of a good place? And also, what are the ways in which we can build in longevity to ensure that these places stand the test of time?
I'm going to build a lot upon what Camilla said here, but I think to me, good placemaking comes from the point of a holistic experience. I think, as Camilla said, you never. I think it starts with good vision. And I think, I am an architect and urban designer, and I think I've been hardwired in the past to think about vision as that static, beautiful image that you see, and that's what you're going to deliver. When actually, I think vision is much more of a framework. It's not that fixed kind of idea, and it actually trickles into not just what it looks like, what does it feel like, what is the human experience through it, and centering design and vision on that, for me, is the primary part of good placemaking. But I think it is also about, it is much more about the process than the product itself. I think good placemaking is not about knowing where we're trying to get to, but hoping you're asking the right questions along the way as you're going along. Because as we know, real impactful, meaningful change happens over time, and context evolves over time. So a vision, a really good vision, is about being able to break down into the first set of principles that you will always keep checking the project against as you go down time. So for me, I can put those first principles in broad context. I think for me, it's context, it's purpose, and it's process. And I think even as you start the project, or as you go midway through a project, or at the end, checking back against that and making tweaks where that's needed is actually good placemaking, because you are building agility into a process that actually traditionally has been quite linear. And to me, it is an ongoing conversation. So for me, I think in that spirit of being an ongoing conversation, it brings me to your point of long-term and legacy. I think it is about acknowledging that meanwhile projects, or any kind of projects, are really about that slice of time in a continuing, evolving conversation. I don't think that the first day you deliver a scheme is about saying it's done, it's delivered, it still continues to evolve like most good cities do. And I think it's about being able to build that agility in and being able to check that in. Camilla talked about management, and I think, and I think that's been my biggest learning as a designer, because I was very much from that school of thought of design the space, that's done. But actually, if you don't know how the space is washing its face, you've designed perhaps something completely wrong or something that's not going to work. But there's also opportunities in management structures to start to bring people in, to start to actually expand that conversation and actually start to make it much more a problem which a community can start to get behind and actually start to leverage those ties. So I think to me it's very much about bringing all of that together, but remembering that and for me data as another thing. When you add that layer of data to all these various points, the power you have to actually check your decision making through and be agile is actually something we didn't have very much previously. And I think that's the advantage here, and being able to use that in an intelligent way, which is much less about finding solutions, but much more about asking the right questions, is what, in my mind, good placemaking is.
Yeah, I think just to pick up on that last point you made, I think that's really key, like to, rather than being solutions oriented, to actually ask the right questions so that it can actually come from the different people involved is really crucial. Maybe to bring you in, Neil, I think both you and David both spoke about the potential of unlocking opportunities through the projects that you presented. And I think it was really interesting to see how in the provision of so much housing, actually that workspace provision and play spaces that you created as well go hand in hand with that, in terms of like how will those spaces actually be activated, which made me think of these developments as a kind of wider ecology. And I was just curious to hear you kind of speak more about like how those spaces as kind of ways to bring in a community can actually be shaped with the people who might end up living there.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, is my mic working?
Not sure.
No?
Okay, now it is, yeah?
Yeah, that's working.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's like I said, it's a sort of web of activities that we need to kind of think about, and I think us as a business, we've probably evolved over the last 30 years considerably. It was very much about just real estate operations. We're at the data point that you actually talked about. I mean, we've got 2 million residents around the world. We've got so much data that we can draw upon from the way that what people want out of their buildings, what they want from their local neighborhoods, etc. And we draw upon that. We survey a lot of our residents. So we're very much a sort of data-driven business, and we'd like to, go more along that route in the future. So a lot of the decisions we make are, again, very strategic in the sense that, we're a very quantitative company, if you think about it, as a real estate company. But what we've brought in as a design team within Greystar is a qualitative approach to decision making. Like I said about, is the TV in front of your sofa? Like a simple thing like that within sort of apartment design. But that kind of attitude is kind of, prevalent for all of our decision making. Are the buildings spread at the right distance? Have you got the right sort of master plan principles kind of in place? Have you carved out the right amount of sort of spaces that you need, within some of these master plan projects? We obviously, not all of our projects are master plan projects. There's obviously sort of single buildings on single sites. We've got, student accommodation. I was talking to a couple of people about our Chapter London Bridge project, which is literally a postage stamp of a site. But we've carved out the entire ground floor to be completely accessible to the public with a cafe, adjacent uses, retail uses that connect into our buildings. So we try and create sort of these public, semi-public, and then you've obviously got the private spaces within our buildings. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what kind of really brought the word ecology to mind. It's like the balance of all these different factors, how they work together in a kind of cohesive way. Camilla, did you want to come in to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that learning or lesson around the importance of data, but specifically the qualitative data, because I think what's happened over the last 15 years or so with the rise of big data is we've become really data hungry, and there's this expectation that if just we have enough data, we can make the right decisions. But a lot of the data that we have a lot of will tell you what is happening in a place. It will tell you the footfall is declining, it is rising, but it won't tell you why. And in order to know why something is happening, you have to speak to people and you have to get those qualitative insights out of that place. And I think that's an aspect of urban research that we need to get much better at. Oh, did my mic just turn on?
We could hear you. I think.
Say that again, or could people hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, so I think that's an aspect of placemaking, evidence gathering we need to get a lot better at.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when it comes to that, like gathering data from local people, I think, David, in your presentation about the Barbican Podium, like that is actually how the project that began with drainage became this amazing, almost like rewilding project of that area. And I think it would be really interesting to hear a bit more about those conversations with kind of local people who live there and how that kind of inspired that bigger transformative change.
Sure. Well, I think it was interesting even attending some, because I wasn't involved in the early stages of the project. So as I did become involved, I was on site with various team members, and there was occasions where they knew residents and they would talk about very specific interventions that they'd discussed previously, and how there were themes emerging from feedback from residents and other stakeholders that are logged, and we were looking for patterns, what responses were within our control that we could do. How did it apply back to policy? And actually that policy that I mentioned is very ambitious and had a huge amount of the vision essence already within it, and it was just a case of applying the right pieces of guidance from that and how it could be applied that started to show that there was a lot more that could be achieved here. And the data piece and how understanding, just gathering the data, I think is, you build up a body of information, and I think it's leveraging that in the next phase that I'm particularly interested in is about how we can dial up some of the interventions. So where certain aspects or greening has been introduced for a particular reason, whether it be for ambient cooling or for wind, in response to a wind issue, are there sort of minute adjustments we can actually enhance this even further, because there's a limit to how much that data can give us this side of the actual event and it being built. And I think once you see how people engage, react and respond, if you continue to have that input and you're able to make incremental adjustments, you'll just increase the benefits that we're hoping that this project could achieve.
Yeah, and I think obviously plays a crucial role in the kind of having that idea of a shared vision for a place. I guess I wanted to pick up maybe then on a point that Sarah made in the last session about the need to kind of engage people very early on, but then also to maybe definitely to bring them along with you. And I'm just curious as to like how through this kind of engagement with people and how it gets transformed into data, at what points in the different projects all of you have worked on, do you actually go back to those people you consulted on? Or when does that data kind of translate into conversations again at different points in the process? I don't know if any of you want to start. Richie, you can start.
Sure. I mean, I'll start in the context of Strand Aldwych, which is a project that I led for Westminster Council. And I think, that project, again, very much like the Barbican, actually started very much from that point of there's an air quality, it was on the Mayor's Safer Junctions list, and if there's an air quality issue and safety issue. But really, so actually, it would very much have stayed a traffic scheme. I think what the reason I think it became the project it did and became about placemaking was because of the people around it. So you had, Somerset House, Courtauld, King's, LSC, the theatres. I mean, pretty much a hub of culture right over there. And we very early on knew that we had locals who were experts, beyond just the neighbourhood itself, but actually experts in their fields. And, how daft would we be not to bring that expertise out into the public realm? Very early on, the conversations, I think, coming from these people who were quite core. So when it was not even an idea, that group that you speak to is actually quite small, but influential. And I think over there, being actually genuinely curious about what they see as success. So, the first thing we did as a design team, and the in-house council design team, was very much to benchmark and run it by these people to say, well, is this what you're talking about? So whether it was, Quarter des Spectacles in Montreal or, the way Times Square was taken forward, all of that was talked about very early days. The fact that, we would need the private sector to put money towards the management of the scheme was talked about early days, because that these are the people you'll go to cap in hand. And I think, that conversation is, so having set that context ourselves as a client team, by the time consultants came on board, we had a good 9 months to a year of conversation with these stakeholders, talking about what the vision is. The vision was the basis for all the various briefs that went out. And then from there, it started to become about really orchestrating that process. So actually being able to understand at which point of the design it actually starts to become about people caring about where the planter goes, because people can't queue there, and we have big queues for theatres. You probably don't need that input on day one. Day one, you probably need to talk about the big stuff, where is the money going to come from, and who are we going to pitch to, and etc. So it's actually understanding that, again, going back to that point of vision and framework, that framework started to get more and more refined over time. So while the metrics on Strand Aldwych, which is the actual design in terms of RIBA 2-stage drawings, informing how the planters are going to be, over 70 people engaged with that in the area. The public consultation, by the time we went in 2018, we had over 1,500 responses to the public consultation, which was quite crazy, for a scheme at that point. I know there is more now. We didn't have digital at that point. There was no commonplace or any of those. And so we had gone, very much, and we had 1,500 plus responses, but we had about a nearly 80% approval on the scheme, because we had people responding to the schemes that were already champions of the scheme. So they could cascade the message further down to actually get behind it. So I think, that point of how, and going back to, I think what I said in the beginning, it's about the right question at the right time, because that conversation refines over time. And I think now, by the end of 6 years having delivered it in a meanwhile capacity, we still think of that project as an engagement stage that's on, because right now we're testing out the management of it. We're understanding how we want to curate it. We're understanding how else we get the funding to actually take that to the permanent stages. But I think that giving the conversation, A, the room to evolve, and B, being curious, genuinely curious, because you don't have all the answers. We really don't. As designers, I think we have to accept that very early on. And I think being humble and curious and bringing these viewpoints in, so actually you're the facilitator of excellence in various fields to create this holistic experience is to me, and I think we tried that with Strand Aldwych.
So I was going to say, I 100% agree with that as well. And I think the other part of the benefit of what you're saying that also comes through is that with the collaboration aspect, that shared vision behind it it is a framework. I think that's an interesting concept, but it certainly is that people invest in it on a kind of emotional level as well, and they're invested, and then, as you said, that they talk to each other, and that shared pride, shared ownership, and if you can foster that, create that environment for people to feel comfortable, that sort of to be able to challenge each other, and that happened, and I found that quite, that's a healthy environment to be in, is when there are stakeholders that are challenging each other and that people feel comfortable they can, but when you may not solve all the issues, and there are always certain compromises, but still when you look at the end result, and I think with the Barbican it's obviously not there yet, but seeing it in other schemes, you do notice that people have that kind of connection to that space that they wouldn't have had necessarily, or to that degree, had they not been engaged with or been able to contribute to the development of that scheme.
I think, if I can just come in there as well, I think I just want to talk about sort of, perception and, perception perhaps of, let's say, an American real estate company coming and developing a housing project in Greenford or in Bermondsey. There's a lot of skepticism there. There's a lot of suspicion there. The planning process is also heavily veiled, and it's so difficult to kind of, even with all these consultations, to understand when something is happening, or you haven't got the memo, and you'll miss it. And so I think we've got to do a lot more. We've got to communicate a lot more, over communicate. I think there's a lot of suspicion about what we do, and I think we need to show people that we're actually invested in the public realm. We're underwriting our developments, ensuring that we've got the right budgets to provide the right high quality sort of, delivery of all of these projects. I mean, if you ask our maintenance team or our operations team, how would you like it? They'd say, let's just have it all hard landscaped, because it's like, but that's not what it's about, So you've got to have those qualitative kind of stop points and those bookends where, you're like, look, I know it makes sense to do that, but it actually makes no sense doing that, And so I think, there's, it's a really interesting space where we are at as Greystar, and, as a person that sort of oversees quite a lot of projects globally, it's educating our internal teams to make sure that they're all making the right types of decisions, long-term decisions, the right design decisions, ensure that's going to ensure that sort of longevity aspect of what we deliver.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important, and I think that it's like dealing with that complexity, like you've all been talking about, between the kind of granular detail and the overall vision. That's, but also across contexts, and how you build trust, I think, is crucial with those conversations. I think, Camilla, you when you were speaking in response to the first question, you were really talking about, I guess, like how you deal with all those 4 parameters at once, and the kind of complexity of having a kind of conversation that intersects the social with the economic, with the environmental. And so maybe you could talk about, like, how do you engage people with that complexity?
Oh, that's a good question, and a complex question. I think we can't shy away from complexity, and certainly not when we're talking about the built environment. I think we've been very good since the sort of industrialization really at reducing what the built environment is about to property values. But of course, it's so much more than that. It is, spoke to some people earlier today about creating canvases for people to express themselves on. And I think the built environment, that becomes the canvas and the backdrop upon which we all sort of paint out our lives and our lives' work. And that is complex. So it's about, yeah, as I said, not shying away from that complexity. But ultimately, I think that the idea of having that one kind of golden, that one vision, that can also help to just crystallize actually what we're trying to achieve here. And from my perspective, if it's not about increasing people's quality of life, if it's not about helping people to thrive and live healthy, fulfilled lives, then what are we even doing here? And then once you sort of agree that, of course, that's what we're trying to achieve, then you sort of go down into this pyramidic framework that becomes like an iceberg, where as soon as you look under the surface, it balloons really quickly. And then you start looking at, okay, how is the ecology working in this neighborhood? How is the economy working in this neighborhood? Do people have a sense of belonging? Do we have diverse representation? Who's in the public spaces? When are they in the public spaces? Are the businesses surviving? And that's when the 100 to 1,000 metrics, we wheeled it down for the framework we've done in Ireland. We had a list of 1,000 metrics that we wheeled it down to sort of 70 that were important here, and that covered the breadth of topics, because you just have to. But as I said, I think that's totally all right as well, and you can't expect to have it any other way. And then with that, and we're talking sort of meanwhile using placemaking today, I think understanding as well which decisions are more permanent and which are more temporary, and not being afraid to going in and adjusting things when we do get them wrong is really important. Because there are some things you do have to determine, like putting a railway down, you don't want to move it every year. Things like planting trees, like we talk about urban greening and interventions with planting boxes and things, but ultimately for a tree to really produce value for our environment and our communities, it needs to go in the ground, and it needs to be connected to other trees underground to be resilient over a 100-year period. So there are some pieces of infrastructure that are slow, and that needs to be serious decisions that are well made from the outset. But then there's all that space in between, which is a lot more flexible than we've maybe been led to believe. So that's another way to deal with that complexity, is to break it up in terms of the actual flexibility of the space, and make sure we get the big decisions right, and then having a bit more fun with the decisions we can go back on and change.
Yeah, I really liked this idea of like the city or the project being a kind of canvas that we all paint our stories onto. I think that's a kind of a nice visual. And maybe a good point to open it up to the audience, if anyone has any questions for our panel. There's questions in the second row.
Hello, my name is Anna Savelova. I'm an urban designer at Air Urbanism. Thank you. I got really fascinated by your speeches, and especially the research on capturing the impacts of placemaking, and this notion of determining these principles in the outset that we need to bring forward. And I wanted to ask about social benefits that you're considering in your projects. And possibly that's the question for everyone. What would you consider a success in terms of social benefits your projects bring? And possibly something we can track against later on. Maybe there are markers, qualitative markers that you can speak about, or quantifiable indicators of this success. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great question about how we kind of measure success. Does anyone want to?
Well, I mean, I can kick off, maybe, perhaps. I mean, our goal is to provide housing. I mean, that's what we're here to do. We're here to provide a housing for a variety of different people, from student housing to multi-family housing, single-family housing, co-living, right up to senior living. And I think what's really interesting for us, I think, in the coming years to come, is providing genuine, attainable housing that's kind of undersupplied at the moment. And so all of these are things that are close to our heart in terms of, you know, communities, longevity. You know, we've got a particular business model that is across a period of time that offers a return on our investment. We've got to deliver on that, and that means that we've got to be, you know, providing a level of service and a level of quality for, you know, from day one right to the end of the life cycle. People review us, and people will vote with their feet. So it's a totally different sort of housing model for I think for a lot of territories. I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, one of my anecdotes is that, you know, this type of institutional rental housing has actually been around for a long time. We just don't know it. It was sort of around in the 1930s, and then it came to a stop when we had to provide social housing. But yeah, it's kicked off obviously over the last 15 years here again, and it genuinely provides a different form of tenure to a lot of people out there.
I can go next. I'll give you a set of metrics that I've been using both on this project and on other projects. So you can measure things like who's present in these spaces. So typically a presence of women and children in public spaces is a sign of a sort of a socially inclusive space, and likewise representation of people from cultural minorities. That's a little bit harder to do through observation. You need to do that through intercept survey, naturally. Volunteering. Are the people in this neighborhood getting engaged and investing their time here? Things like a sense of belonging. So you can talk to people and ask them if they are proud of their neighborhoods, and if they feel a sense of ownership to those spaces within it. And then you can look at socio-demographic factors like whether there's a lot of economic mobility within the neighborhood. So if the parents haven't gone to higher education, are the children able to go through higher education? Those sorts of factors as well. So that's just sort of a small set of different types of factors that begin to give you a sense of whether a place is sort of being socially sustainable and productive.
I think just to add, in terms of schemes, I think the success of the scheme is, again, to me, very much that becomes an integral part of the vision. Because when you're talking about the vision itself, I think a lot of it right from the beginning is about what would really make this place a success. I mean, I'm going to give you two examples. Of course, one was Strand Aldwych, where, you know, we were creating a new place from nothing, and a place where one didn't exist. So very early days, we were talking about place and identity with all the stakeholders. Designing the management model was very much about basing it around this identity, and the management model was very clearly broken down into, you know, very nuts and bolts stuff that would be needed to manage it. So the operations and the security, the curation and the activation, the digital experience, whether it's seamless, and, you know, whether people are actually well included within there. Sustainability, and understanding particularly that sustainability is not about the slice of time, but really how it builds upon itself over time. And then for each one of these, depending on who in the area was interested or would have a chance of contributing to that aspect of management, those working groups of community actually are the ones who helped us get our KPIs out to understand how we would measure it. So there are actually sensors in place to measure air quality for a while now. There is, we have a good understanding and qualitative analysis of who's coming in and out of the space. One of the other metrics was that, there's no way to quantify it, but one thing we knew and was said a number of times was that this would be a truly democratic place in the time when there were mostly privately owned public spaces. And I think what that really meant was not something that, we had to really get to the bottom of that to understand, because it's, of course, we all want that. We all want to raise the level of the free public experience, which is what Strand Aldwych was about always. But really, the flip side of that is when you don't have a chunk of money for the management of it, there's a lot of antisocial behavior that also starts to come with democratic spaces, and how do you really manage that, etc. Also, some of these things were parked for being conversations that evolve over time, that we actually start to understand how the space is behaving and then define some of these metrics. But I think for me, I firmly believe that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to this. I think every place is bespoke. I think every place has metrics or is very much rooted within its context. It goes back to my point of context. And I think, the success there, and I think the second scheme, and just to contrast that, was another set of schemes that I led was when Westminster, shut down, and you had alfresco schemes everywhere, and Soho had shut down, and, we had alfresco on the road, and everyone, the whole city said, we should have done this years ago for Soho. Well, Soho hated it, because they were residents and, we were at their doorstep. So, where do you put that metric of success there? The metric of success there was, it was it was really a scheme that was done to save businesses, and we ended up saving about 450 businesses, most of them which were small. So while I take that as a successful scheme, I think, again, there's a reason we are not going in that direction in Soho, because, the residents absolutely unanimously turned that down. So I think, again, going back to, that point of, it really is rooted in context, again. And I think for to me, that's an integral part of the design process, because you have to know what you're designing for and what questions you're asking along the way.
Come to you.
So just to summarise, really, I think the measure of success is unique to each scheme. I think the measure of success on the Barbican project will be how it responds to the themes that emerged from the consultations originally. I think we talk about the social benefits, and you can measure things such as the well-being of people using that space, and we know that a better connection to nature can do that. There's going to be environmental improvements, hopefully, in terms of ambient air temperature, wind, as I mentioned, but also the increase in biodiversity and creating spaces for people to connect to each other and to the place itself. Now, that Barbican scheme is in one of the most incredible settings you can imagine. So how people connect to each other is hopefully going to be a measure that improved strengthen existing communities that live in that estate, but also connect their relationship to that site and the place as well. And those things can be measured. And I think, going back to your point, it is project specific what the sort of KPIs are for each one. They're just some that I think are specific for the Barbican.
Thank you. Sorry, it's project specific, but there are some, I think, universal metrics that we would benefit from embedding into our rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. And I really don't want that to be a particularly onerous exercise, but the government does have some guidance around measuring, for example, whether people that live in a place feel that people from diverse backgrounds get on well together in that space. And I think it would be lovely if every scheme had to report on just a handful of similar social success metrics, so that we could start to become a bit more methodological around gathering this evidence, and thereby also making the case for doing more and better work.
Yeah, I think that's a a really great point in that I think we use words like inclusive places or inclusive public space a lot, but like to actually drill down into what that means, and like you've all pointed out, like finding the data to back that up is really important. So I think the more that data can be gathered by projects across the city or multiple cities, I think the better that can be for people doing research or people designing projects to have access to and learn from. Are there any other questions? There's a question over there, and then.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to use probably some of the terminology that you were referring to the public space, like the division between the hardware and the software. So I'm curious about if you have any advice about how can a long-term vision for public spaces renewal can integrate adaptive managing practices and a strategic funding allocation that can ensure that both the hardware, like the software, like the activities, the experiences, and the hardware, like landscape, lighting, the finishing of the space, the maintenance of the drainage, and all of these things that we saw today, can continuously be updated and respond to the evolving community needs.
Do you want to go first?
It's really interesting. You mentioned the word estate. I mean, a lot of our projects are essentially private estates, yeah. But you know what they're labelled as sort of public space, but they are essentially managed. They're fully managed spaces. You know, we've got security, we've got on-site roving estate people, especially on these master plans. You know, so you know, there's a lot of sort of boots on the ground, as it were, to kind of keep this working. It's a machine, right? And it's got a huge lifespan. And you know, I mean, these big projects, we haven't really done many of them in the past. You know, we've done single buildings, and you know, the spaces around them, they're kind of easy. Those are. But when you've got these multi-building master plans, you've got 20 acres, 25, 30 acres of space that you're having to deal with. You've got new infrastructure, you've got roads, you've got parking to deal with, you've got commercial stuff that may be successful, may not be successful, depending on the markets. And you've got workspace that you may have underwritten 10 years ago, thinking, oh yeah, workspace is going to, suddenly the whole workspace sector just falls away, and you're thinking about how you're going to reappropriate these buildings. And so it's a continual thing, but that aspect of kind of operations, maintenance, events, all of those things are really important to try and get people there. I mean, Greenford, I think, is a space that we didn't really anticipate it being so family orientated. There's so many families that are actually not living there, but they're coming there, because it's got waterside kind of activities. It's got an amphitheater there that people can just kind of enjoy, without even having to activate it. It's got play spaces, it's got dog parks, it's got pet sort of areas, All of our lobbies are kind of semi-public in the sense that you can go and use the toilet facilities there, or the washrooms, or the baby changing facilities. So that kind of helps all of those kind of public areas. But yeah, look, it's something that you've got to really take seriously, underwrite it. I keep saying underwrite, and I keep talking about budgets, because a lot of our development teams don't get the budgets right, and we're underwriting the wrong figures, and it will hurt us down the line. So making sure that we benchmark and we understand, what are the OPEX costs, over the lifespan of the building? What are the, CAPEX costs for maintenance and upkeep? Having a bit of grass actually is a really tough bit of thing to keep looking green all year round if you don't take care of it. So yeah, it's all, really, really important considerations.
To your point, I mean, because from a developer, in a developer context, of course, the management, I see it as, one box that comes out of the developer, and that's a budget that, of course, it's your budget. In the context of something which is a fabric of a city and owned by the council, such as Strand Aldwych or any of the roads, where actually, as we know, councils don't have the money to do the year-on-year uplift of management budgets, which is why you need the private sector investment to do it. So I think one of the things we discovered in Strand Aldwych, and again, being a designer myself, of course, knew nothing about management systems. And I think, not trying to reinvent the wheel is quite important. I think starting from that point of experience being the question you're always asking. Of course, it's not about, where the planter goes or everything. Who's taking care of that planter? Would we like a head gardener? Would it be good to have a head gardener who will work with your education goals and start to cascade that knowledge a bit more into the community? Or is that what we're budgeting for? Or are we just saying the bid, which actually does have people who work for it, can take up some of the gardening? It also then informs the kind of planting we've put there. It's very low maintenance. It's really, it takes care of itself. So I think going to that point of experience and saying, what is it that we want here and how do we make that happen? Also finding existing systems that are there that you can plug into. A big part of the vision was that it would be the global cultural thinking quarter. This came from the stakeholders. A council is not the driver of culture. I mean, however great their culture teams are, that's not what they do, day on day. Whereas why would we compete with the Somerset houses and the Courtauls to do culture when actually the curation should just be taken care of by them? And, we were very amazed by the kind of goals that came out there and therefore the kind of installations we ended up having. It started from, in an experienced way, just a very throwaway line which said, oh my God, no floating Yodas in this place like Covent Garden, all right? And it just meant we will not have, we want proper culture. We want the threshold of the public experience to be raised. We want people to actually start to engage with art in a better way. And, what that meant was, when we did the traffic switch, the skate park that we tried on actually came from Somerset House, and they, made those connections and made it happen. And what we're testing now is that system and how that could build as a shared system that already exists between King's, Courtauld, Somerset House, etc. So I think, starting from that point of experience, but also plugging into systems that already exist to pull that together in a context which is where you don't have a developer being able to pay for something like that.
Invent the wheel unless the wheel is the budget spreadsheets and they aren't working for us.
Yeah, exactly. Dave, did you want to add anything, or shall I go to the next one? There's a question in the front.
Thank you, and thank you for the lovely presentations. My question was more around, you all have actually kind of alluded to it. Are there any kind of specific models of community stewardship that you've really invested in? Because I'm thinking about the social value aspect of it, which always kind of gets, put at the end. And you always have to think about it at the start of a process in terms of any kind of skills. Have you really looked at the community? And I think, Neil, particularly for you, maybe it's different because you're looking at these private estates. But Ruchi, you've been with Westminster, and I've firsthand seen the fantastic work they've done in Church Street. So really, it's a question about how communities can help and lessen the burden, but you're also sharing some of those skills and that knowledge and that engagement that they will have with the spaces. So if you could give me an example of any particular model that is proving to be successful, it would be good to learn.
Sure. I mean, I think with Strand Aldwych, I think it was done in the more privileged part of the borough. So in terms of, community, actually we were also, we didn't have very many residents on the Strand itself. You do have the community, the Covent Garden Community Association, etc. But, they are very engaged with Covent Garden, not so much the Strand Aldwych side. I think your question around community stewardship is something that I came across a lot when I started to work in the north of the borough in Harrow Road, Paddington, that area. Because what you have in those areas, because it is, as we know, in the 10% most deprived wards in the entire country, it also has a massive open space deficiency problem. It also has been historically ignored by the council, and I can say that now because I've left. But I think it's a build-up of a lot of these conditions that have been part of it. And I think community stewardship, what we found in those areas was, the communities tend to be much more tightly knit together and much more easier to pull together into a conversation. You talk to one person, they're so well connected with everyone else, you start to pull a group together quite quickly. And we had the same question there about, we're doing a lot of greening around there and a lot of public realm development and actually being able to do proper placemaking. And it was the same question, we're turning roads to open spaces, who's going to manage it? And that's where actually this concept of creating gardening clubs, working with the local community, but actually tapping into the metrics of, so going back to data, there are many things we found about there. They have a big problem with antisocial behavior. They have a big problem with deprivation. They have open space deprivation. They have a childhood obesity problem. So I think kind of starting to work on those. You have enough dots to connect there to say, well, let's start to work on activity. Let's start to work with personal trainers in the area who actually can bring XYZ activities within that space. Let's start to design spaces for that, but also start to pull the community in. So we also looked at the Hammersmith Garden communities, which also work, so if you see there a bit in Phoenix School, etc., they work with communities to create amazing areas. We were also lucky to have Meanwhile Gardens, which is also in Kensington, just in the other borough, where they have managed to do gardening with the community a lot more. And actually that's given benefits in terms of well-being, in terms of a lot of other things. So while the model on Strand Aldridge, given it's in an affluent area, was very different, we can actually go there cap in hand. There's no way we can go cap in hand north of the borough. So there, let's actually start to design for systems and again start to pull these gardening clubs together. Let's start to pull, down to, there was a building which used to be a drug rehabilitation project in the area. That's now been converted to a flexible space, but that's been taken over. The tenants we brought in there was Rebel Business School, which is running a 1-year free business school for residents of the Harrow Road area to get them into the workforce. So, it's again designing not just the space itself, but the overall experience down to who you're bringing in there. So how do you actually start to create a system as opposed to a solution to a problem?
David, can I call on you next to kind of talk about maybe a social value in terms of not just people, but also in terms of biodiversity as well?
Sure. And I think, and so, I don't know what keeps doing happening, but in terms of the sort of stewardship models and biodiversity, I think the thing that comes to mind, partly what we did on Barbican, but on other projects, is engaging with communities and things really early, because I think that, and allowing flexibility in the brief, and the brief, and I think it was mentioned earlier that the brief is a kind of creative process as well, and it is, and I think having that influence and adapting the brief at that early stage around themes often may involve environment and ecology, and it's ever more in people's consciousness, which rightly so, allows us to sort of embed principles and parameters which you touched on earlier, that they get agreed, and you look at that from the different stakeholders, different kind of perceptions and angles, and then you try and coalesce around the kind of framework, the principles that you agree on. And I think that by doing that, and quite often environment, ecology, biodiversity is actually one of the common grounds that you'll find is shared amongst many different stakeholders from different perspectives. And then from that, build, adapt, keep engaging, and again, changing, tweaking the brief as necessary. Possibly even on occasions we've had to readjust our hierarchy of what we think the sort of overarching principles may be, because, going back to another point that's made here about how context changes, culture changes, politics change, and that flexibility needs to be baked into the process of the design, but also the continual management as well.
I mean, Camilla, do you want to add to that from the research that you've been doing in terms of a good social value example?
I think generally I like to think about community ownership and developer or local authority stewardship. actually, but that's just terminology or language. That's a bit beside the point. I have come across a fantastic example through my work with Property Exchange. So I was a program manager for a knowledge exchange forum focused on the recovery of high streets for a year. And one of the case studies we had there was a community in Palmer's Green. And they were just local community members who, it started with them feeling that their high street was in a bit of a state and the local council wasn't managing it well. So they organized a cleanup. And then a group of them through that started to connect with one another and found that they had sort of a shared vision for Palmer's Green to be a more beautiful neighborhood and to raise sort of the profile and pride that people might have in that place. And that then started this whole series of this whole series of programs that they or actions that they then this journey that they then went on. So they're called the Palmer's Green Action Team now, and one of their initiatives is when there's a vacant high street shop, and they have a conversation about what operators they would like to see in that space, and if there's a bakery in the town next door that they really like, they'll create a pitch deck for that bakery and take it to the bakery and say, there's an empty shop on our high street, we know the landlord, why don't you come open a bakery on our high street? And they've been successful in getting operators into their high street with that model. And when we spoke to them, what was really interesting was that it worked, and the initiatives that they were focused on came from the skills that those people had. So there was a woman on the committee who was a marketing person, and that's how she knew how to put together a pitch. And that's probably why that was one of their initiatives. They also organize street events and so on. And the local council loves this, right? They love this group of community members, and are sort of trying to support them as much as they can, to the extent that that community group now are feeling a little bit like, well, we did this for ourselves. We didn't really do it for you. We didn't do it so that it looked like you were doing a good job at regeneration. And I think what's really interesting about that story is it could only ever happen organically. And how you get those people together who have that passion and drive, and how that crystallizes into a movement in that way where people are affecting actual change. I mean, if I had the recipe for that, I would share it gladly. But I think there's a lot of luck and serendipity in it. But I think the opportunities of that happen do increase when the public realm is conducive to people meeting each other and rubbing shoulders with each other and discovering that they have those shared ambitions.
Yeah, I mean, that, I guess, finally to Neil, it's a good point to pick up on.
Echoes so many of the things that, you know, happen in our buildings. And I keep talking about buildings because that's essentially what we have on our sites. I mean, we deal with people, right? Essentially, we're providing homes, and we employ, our management teams are actually, I mean, they're amazing people. Because they've just got this quality that, you know, is needed to deal with, you know, 500, 600 people that have always a problem. They're always going to come to you with a problem. But it's knowing the name of their dog, or it's knowing everyone by their first name. It's that quality of service that creates this stickiness, yeah, within, you know. And so, you know, we're literally blank canvases. You know, we will start with nobody living in one of our buildings, and we will slowly ramp up over the year, and we will fill our building. And then that building, you know, people will move out maybe in a year's time or whatever, but that will continue for the rest of its life. Now, there'll be some people that will continue to live there. They'll form their own WhatsApp groups. They'll form a little community garden group. They'll form, let's go and clean the canal group or something, right? So you'll suddenly, you know, I find that design also kind of creates behavioral changes, and I think, you know, providing people with something that they're proud of, and that they invite their friends over or their family over, and they use our communal spaces and our public spaces and that gives people a real sense of pride. A really funny anecdote I use, and it's kind of unrelated, but kind of related, is we did a refurb for one of our student properties, and the previous design was kind of very nightclubby, and there was lots of fights. Everyone used to fight, and there was lots of violence, and there was just a really bad attitude in one of our buildings. And then we softened it all up with, much more sort of softer, more comfortable kind of interiors, and it completely changed the behavior of the people living in that building. It was fundamental. Our management teams were able to say, there's been a fundamental change in behavior. So all of those things are, I know we're talking about public space, and I know I'm talking about, kind of private buildings, but they're, I kind of see them in a similar vein because it kind of, it permeates out of our buildings into those kind of public spaces as well.
And you have the data to back this anecdote up so other people can learn from it as well. And
yeah, well, I mean, absolutely, and let people know about it more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, that's all the time we have in this session. But I think it's a great way to end, because I think really designing that kind of sense of community into these long-term visions is what creates a kind of shared endeavor to make really great public spaces that last through time. So yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing afternoon to kind of span from the temporary that really kind of catalyzes and activates public space to the kind of permanent long-term kind of ideas around stewardship and care in our built environment. And before we thank our incredible panel, I just wanted to let you all know that the book launch of the Public London Activating the City book is in half an hour, and they need some time to reset the space. So in order to continue this amazing conversation that we've had over the last 3.5 hours, it'd be great if you could all head to the bar and grab a drink, and then come back for the book launch. But then, but I guess then, other than that, the last thing for me to do is just to thank our amazing panel, second one of the day, and also all of you for coming and for all your incredible questions. So thank you.